Hi, so as the video title suggests, I'm going to be talking about this video and specifically the sort of bad criticisms, but also weird criticisms, and like it's also a good points. It's weird, it's odd, it's complicated. I was sent this video by a commenter of mine, Mr. Approva Signa. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, who suggested I watch this. And when I watched this, I had like one very feeling throughout the entire thing. I was very like upset and angry about it because it doesn't really understand what Dragon Age is, nor like the type of RPGs that Bioware make, and all the sort of identity crisis that this guy has is just like him misunderstanding everything, right? But then there are like points where I agree with him, and I don't necessarily think he makes like bad points of it. It's just a complicated video, and I wanted to use this as a springboard to not only talk about some of the issues that some like Dragon Age fans have when they don't really understand the series itself, but also on like bad criticism in general. The title for this video is the Dragon Age Identity Crisis. Yet he doesn't really firmly establish the identity crisis that the Dragon Age series has, and all he really points to is more of like a vague gesturing of combat art style, and that's it. And so that's what I want to go through. So let's go through it. And also, I will be going to specific timestamps. I'm not going to be watching the whole video, as you can see with me being at the 2 minute mark over here. I'm going to be going from point to point to get to the actual ones I think that are relevant to this discussion. And if you wanted to actually see the whole video itself without me just like going from point to point, the video is in the description below. And the stuff that I do skip are either stuff that I do agree with or stuff that is just plot synopsis. So yeah. I will be 2 times speeding it just for this specific section, just because it can be a bit long, and for the rest of it, I'll have him talk normally.
Now, well, it's an interesting case. The series as a whole can be used to showcase Bioware's changes throughout the years, and it requires a different insight into the series, like Mass Effect or Fallout. See, with Mass Effect, despite each installment altering in some way with the series, it stays true to what it always was in the beginning, an unforgettable space epic with a rich world and memorable characters that continues as the story progresses. With games like Elder Scrolls and Skyrim, they're very self-contained stories that don't require you to play the previous. The only thing that stays the same is the universe that it takes place in, whether it's Morrowind to Skyrim, to the Capital Wasteland, to Mojave Desert. Dragon Age, on the other hand?
Now, there's an issue with him saying that, like, yeah, I mean, it's a self-contained story for the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series, but that's a bit of an issue because if you ask fans of those series, they'll complain about how it's inconsistent. Yeah, sure, like, they have some through line, but there are a lot more bigger inconsistencies that lead to them, especially because Fallout and Elder Scrolls are a lot more, like, mechanics focused than Dragon Age or Mass Effect are, which informs a lot more of their, like, narrative and questing and everything like that. Morrowind questing is very different from Skyrim questing, and a lot of Morrowind fans hate the fact that that's the case. Same with Fallout 4 and Fallout New Vegas. They're very different in their structure, right? And so, as he's going to say here now,
it's not really like either of those. Well, it is, but it's also not. It's hard to explain. Dragon Age is probably one of the most topsy-turvy series that I've ever played. Each title is vastly different from the others in gameplay and tone. If you were to play these games in order, you would notice a very vast juxtaposition. The games range from an incredible experience that meets a nice balance of old and new mechanics from Bioware's original work, a complete shit show that was rushed in development but still manages to be enjoyable in an ironic sense, to a fundamental absence of not just the original game's style, but a lack of faith in Bioware's creative methods. The Dragon Age series is one of the hardest games to look at as a series because it rides a tightrope on each game being its own story, but also wanting to be a connected saga. Well, I say rides a tightrope, but...
Now, again, we'll get more to this as we continue through the video, but it is a weird thing to say that, like, the Dragon Age series is so, like, disconnected from each other, when that's not really how it works. Like, what connects a series together isn't just gameplay or aesthetics or, like, even story, like, methods. It's, like, the very core fundamental principles of it. And this could be gameplay, story, or aesthetics, right? And for Elder Scrolls and for, Fallout, a lot of those fans, depending on who you ask, think that their gameplay is the sort of fundamental core of that series, And for Dragon Age, the fundamental, like, core for it is, like, story, telling story through characters. That means, like, perspectives and stuff, and the type of RPG it is, which, means that you're playing as a character that Bioware made for you and decided to what that character can do and what they can't do, instead of, like, playing your own kind of character, right? Like, that's the sort of, like, Bioware, like, formula for all their games, and what, like, the Dragon Age series has gone through from game to game. And as for, like, being a connective saga, that's only, like, true for, like, Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, and even then that's, like, connected in the sense that one conflict carries from the other conflict, right? Which is, like, sort of true, but, like, again, it's complicated. We'll get to it as we get to it.
But it's more like fumbling across a bridge. It's almost like Bioware didn't know what to do with the series going forward, and it's constantly fighting with each other on what it wants to be.
Now there is some point to this. This guy also doesn't do a lot of research, and if he does, he would have found a lot of like arguments for himself. Um, so after Dragon Age Origins released, right, the sort of perspective of Dragon Age Origins is that the people who are making it that were saying like, hey, we think this game is going to be like successful, right? But it's not going to be like what like hits Bioware into the stratosphere, right? That is going to be Mass Effect. A lot of the thought process at the time was Mass Effect was going to be the big game for Bioware. Dragon Age Origins was not a small project, not a tiny project. It was taking a lot of resources and development time. It developed a new engine for itself, but it was thought of as it was going to be an okay game. Maybe in the future it's going to be a cult classic and it's going to warrant a sequel. Not as successful as they thought it was going to be. And so a lot of the sort of perspective of making Origins was making a standalone game that was not going to see a sequel until years later. But it was a very huge success, and a sequel was warranted. And the sequel that was originally going to be for Dragon Age Origins was Dragon Age Inquisition. You know, it wasn't going to be Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age 2 existed because EA needed some game to fill the gap that SWTOR left. You know, because Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO, was going to be delayed, and since it's delayed, it was going to be delayed into the next quarter. And EA needed another game from BioWare to fill the quarter that SWTOR left, and so that's why Dragon Age 2 exists. So there is some validity to like BioWare doesn't really know what they wanted to do with the Dragon Age series, but there's also another perspective which is they did, right? And that was like Dragon Age Inquisition, right? And they did make Dragon Age 2 the way they did because that is what they wanted to do, you know? So next part is just going to set the title of the video, and now I'm going to go to the next section. Okay.
And we'll get to that later. Starting off, we need to look back at what made the first Dragon Age special to so many people. On the surface level, this game seems pretty generic. It's a similar BioWare formula that has been done so many times before, even at this point. Ever since KOTOR, a pattern had emerged with BioWare games. The main character is a typical fish-out-of-water protagonist. They get a call to action to fight the big evil bad guy that threatens them, so they rise up and meet their first companion who accompanies them on their harrowing journey, and meet countless of others who also offer to join you for their own reasons. You travel the world or galaxy, meeting new people, learning about your allies in the world, and slowly work together to a final showdown with the main antagonist. This was pretty standard stuff for BioWare, but it was by no means a bad thing. BioWare prided itself on telling simple to understand stories that was more about the journey rather than the destination. The experience was built way more on the different places you travel and learning more about the people you traveled with. Hell, when I first played Dragon Age Origins, it was after I had played the KOTOR games, and I started to really see a pattern between the two main companions you get in a lot of their games. You got the generally generic.
So at this first point, he sort of establishes that the identity of Dragon Age is this sort of like old BioWare formula of, as what he put it, and like yeah, sure, that is somewhat what BioWare like was doing and was like sort of like cliched formula at the time. But I don't necessarily think that is like what makes their games their games. It wasn't really about the cliches of fish out of the water protagonists meeting a bunch of different people and going on to fight a very huge threat or whatever. It was a lot more than just that, you know. But we'll let him like finish a bit more.
Generic but well-meaning male character that will first join you. These two even have the same VA. Then you got the mean-spirited, headstrong girl that has more hidden under the surface. Or they're just racist.
I can't tell the aliens.
Yeah, so like again, somewhat there are connections with that, but it does feel like more like grasping at straws, which I think is a bit of an issue for this video because it does feel like it bogs it down, right? There's no real like point to saying that other than like, yeah, there are like similarities to other previous BioWare games, but not really focusing on like what specifically is the identity of like, you know, Dragon Age, right? Like sure, it has similar things from previous BioWare games and you can mention it, but like what is the point of, you know, specifically mentioning all these kind of things, you know?
From the animals.
But what was it that made Origins stand out?
Okay.
It seems pretty similar compared to other BioWare games, only with a fancy background. Well, as the name implies, the origin system. While most RPGs would have your character's backstory not elaborated on to let the player determine it, Origins lets you pick from 3 different races.
Now, which is like a big part of Dragon Age Origins' identity, and something that is lacking with the other games. So you can say it somewhat exists in Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. Dragon Age 2 technically does have you play a bit of Hawk's origin, and Inquisition does imply an origin sort of kind of character. But this is like, I think, a fairly good point to make that is part of like the identity of Dragon Age, or a huge part of it at least.
And 3 different classes that all start the game in completely different ways. There are 6 intros in this game where you start that are also vary in dialogue and interactions depending on your race and gender. There were subtle hints of this back in the first Mass Effect game, where you were able to select your background on where Shepard came from and how they became an expert soldier that they are. But Origins blew this out of the water. You experience a completely unique side of this world, and thus forth made your character feel like someone who is a part of it. It also helped that Dragon Age was one of the first pieces of media that really popularized the idea of dark fantasy. Naturally, there were plenty of other media that existed.
Now, for this one, when he talks about dark fantasy, he doesn't really define what dark fantasy like means to him, and I think that's a very like poor way of like saying, hey, if this video is about like the identity crisis of Dragon Age, you kind of have to define your terms, right? He defined like Origins fine enough, which is cool, but he doesn't really define what dark fantasy really means. He mostly like just vaguely gestures at like, well, you know, gore and stuff, you know, dark fantasy, you know, dark fantasy, you know. So let him just finish it.
Existed, but few and far between, especially when it came to on-screen depictions. This was 2 years before Game of Thrones came out on TV, and The Witcher was still a relatively small name. Dragon Age was one of the big ones that introduced ultra-violence and sexual themes in fantasy.
And there you go. Like, is that like what the part of identity of, you know, Dragon Age is? Like ultra-violence and sex scenes? Well, sex scenes, they've got it down, right? Like, I think I saw tits in Dragon Age Inquisition. I'm sure I did, you know. Maybe not enough, you know, but like, hey, you're right. And as for like ultra violent, you know, themes and stuff, well, not ultra violence. Yeah, I guess in Inquisition there wasn't a lot of like ultra violence, but I think that's very contextual, right? Dragon Age Origins wasn't just like sexual and, you know, ultra violent for like no reason, you know. Let's go back a bit to the scene he showed over here. When he showed
before Game of Thrones came out on TV, and The Witcher was still a relatively small name. Dragon Age was one of the big ones that introduced ultra-violence and sexual themes in fantasy.
The battle over here, when like King Kaelin gets crushed.
Game of Thrones came out on TV, and
right?
The Witcher was still
like,
a relatively small name.
Why did Dragon Age
Age
Origins do this? Why did it do this? Because it wanted to be that kind of fantasy, or because it was necessary for the type of story it was telling? And I think it's because it was the sort of necessity of the story it was telling, right? Like, one of the things and big criticism that dark fantasy gets, and I think is particularly valid, is that a lot of it is just like gruesome for gruesome's sake. There's no real point to it, you know? And specifically that it wants to be more than it is, right? If you have a story that is just like gruesome, gore, sex and stuff, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with just having that as like a game or a movie or a TV show. There's nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong is if you want to make it more, if it's more meaningful. And the thing is with Dragon Age Origins, it wanted to be more meaningful with it. It wanted to showcase this like ultra violence in a very negative context, in a very like disheartening, somber way. You were losing the battle, and you could see how you were losing the battle like badly. You can see the soldiers you were seen throughout the entire Ostagar camp, and they're just dying left, right, and center. It's a sad moment. It's somber, you know? But like, from the way this guy tells it, it seems like, yeah, Dragon Age is just ultra violent, you know, just as a base thing, which is an odd thing to say.
One of the big ones that introduced ultra violence and sexual themes in fantasy when the genre rarely had seen them. They also did not shy away from the fucked up concepts that many
and again,
dark
like that, right?
fantasies tend to explore. The City Elf intro.
And like that, right? Like this, he's going to say like the City Elf intro is like a very good sort of stroke of this dark fantasy. But again, that was like for a point, right? It was showing the oppression of elves and how they are affected, by the whole, human occupation and whatnot. And like, yeah, that's cool, right? But like, there was a point to it. It wasn't just that, yeah, let's have like sex and stuff and like rape and stuff. It's like, no, we need a reason for all this happening and contextualize it, and that's the kind of game Dragon Age is.
Intro is especially dark as it involves you or your fiance, depending on your gender, being kidnapped and threatened to be a very bad thing by human nobles. Right off the bat, regardless of the intro, Dragon Age shows the player that this is a cruel and unforgiving world, regardless of who you are.
And yeah, and that's, again, by implication, not really true for the rest of the games, right? Which is like untrue. That happens a lot, The game is still like oppressive and still has many characters shown to be like in terrible situations and whatnot. And Inquisition has this in spades. Dragon Age 2 has this in spades. He doesn't really make that point that Dragon Age or Dragon Age 2 isn't like dark fantasy, but it does make that point for like Dragon Age Inquisition, which is nothing. But we'll get to there when we get there. Again, and this is like him not really defining dark fantasy that well, and defining dark fantasy again by like vaguely gesturing at, yeah, but like gruesome, like violence, sex, gore, rape. It's like, yeah, those are like things that are part of dark fantasy, but like, what's the underlying like element of dark fantasy? Is it not the sort of oppressiveness, the darkness, or like sort of oppression generally? And how is it portrayed in Dragon Age? That's not really, again, done, which I think is a failure for this video, because it doesn't really like accurately critique what is actually there.
And the origins will even give a completely different perspective on where the places you go throughout the game. For example, if you play as a mage character and you are tasked with going to the Circle of Magi, the people there will recognize you and comment on your past actions in the intro. Beyond the origin system, the story itself is another reason why this game was so well received. Regardless of your origin, you will meet Duncan, the lead commander of the Grey War.
Now again, he doesn't really define what about the story like makes it like an identifiable part or like of Dragon Age. Again, he just like more vaguely gestures, and the rest of this part is just going to be him like plot synopsing. So I'm just going to skip to the next part. Okay, and for this part, I'm just going to 2x speed it because this is going to be a long part. So
Like I said, the story is a typical fish out of water story, save the world type bullshit. But where the intrigue comes in is with the smaller scale stories that take place in between the main plot. We get some really interesting shit, like a bitter elf that cursed an entire generation of humans into being monstrous werewolves, dwarf politics between two leaders on very opposite sides of the spectrum, and a demon that possesses a child to the point where it manipulates the entire family. Not to mention that stopping the Darkspawn is just one side of the plot. The secondary plot revolves around Logain corrupting the land of Ferelden with lies for the benefits of political power. And it becomes a story of human nature and infighting, oblivious to a rising power that threatens to destroy the lands.
now, is that Dragon Age's origin story? I don't particularly think so. I think, and it's somewhat like, he's somewhat right, but he's not right with the specific like words and I think intent behind it somewhat. Dragon Age Origins, I think, is the examination of how politics can get in the way of real issues, such as the Darkspawn, which Logain, who is obsessed with the Orlesians, allows King Talon to die because he's afraid that the Orlesians are going to come and invade, their country, weakened from, the attack from the Darkspawn, and Orlesians will come back and to conquer, Ferelden. And he does that, and that's like the politics getting into the way of it. And throughout the entire game, you are, trying to solve politics so they can actually address the real issues. You have two kings in Orzammar who are trying to, take the throne, and again, that's getting in the way of finding the Darkspawn. You have the elves, and you can say, well, that's not really politics, but it's weird. It's kind of politics because Zathrian is not wanting to sacrifice his own life to, save his elven people, right? That's like sort of politics, personal politics getting into the way of it. Then you have like with Redcliffe, the politics of Logain, like a crippled, Eamon, which caused a lot of other issues, It's like, okay, cool. Politics again get in the way, right? And again, that's I think was more like accurate to Dragon Age Origins, at least as a whole, not really specific what he says.
Wait a minute. But anyway, yeah, this game is really good. It was made in the heyday of Bioware, and as well, a lot of people consider one of the last open-ended RPGs that they ended up making. And it's no surprise to see why they say that.
And again, that's another weird thing, like open-ended RPG, right? Like, what is open-ended about Dragon Age Origins, right? You can say open-ended as in the choices you can make, but the choices you make are like 3 options, you know, and for the big choices it's 2 options, you know. You have, for most quests, like, you can kill the guy, or, you know, you can be neutral to the guy, or you can, like, be nice to the guy and help him. And, like, the conversations you can have are, like, again, generally this tone of good, nice, good, neutral, or bad. And for the big choices, there's, like, 2 options most. For 2 to 3 options. For the one he shows here, there are 3 options. You can help Zathrian, you know, kill Wilderfane, but the werewolves still exist. You can, you know, kill Zathrian and the elves, which helps the werewolves, or you can just, like, allow Zathrian to, you know, sacrifice himself and Witherfane, and then, you know, oh, cool, they're all good and whatnot. Like, those are the 3 choices. They're interesting, right? But Dragon Age isn't really open-ended. There's not a lot of ways you can solve these situations on your own. You're expected to solve them the way BioWare intended them to be solved.
There's so much variety with the choices in this game. Hell, even without the intros, the main plot in this game has so many ways to complete them. Take the quest mentioned before with the demon possession.
Yeah, again, that's... Like, there are, like, 3 ways to do it, you know? And, like, that's not so many different ways to complete them, because what so many different ways to complete them means is you can achieve a goal through many different paths, right? And you don't do that in Dragon Age Origins. There are only, like, a few paths you can take to accomplish a goal, right? There are many different outcomes, like 3 or 2 in some instances, but there are not that, you know, many ways to get there. Which is another weird thing, because I think what has been more appropriate here to say as the identity of Dragon Age, and mostly BioWare as a whole, is the type of RPGs they make. And the type of RPGs they make is, BioWare makes RPGs that you play as someone, right? And that someone is then, you know, that someone informs all the sort of choices and options you have available for the game. And that's a lot more true than, like, what he's saying, where you have a lot of options, a lot of different outcomes, and a lot of different ways to get to those outcomes. It's like, nah, that's not really what, like, Dragon Age is.
Child. On first sight, there are only 2 options. There's the direct one, kill the kid. Morbid, yes, but this means that the demon would be vanquished as well, and it can't possess another person. The alternative is to use blood magic to transmit the demon to another person, to which the kid's mother volunteers. However, this would involve killing her and going into the void to maybe even make a deal with the demon, which I totally did get that blood magic. Or a third option is to get the mages of the circle to help you with the situation, but that decision counts on another decision you made with a completely different questline. And this is just one of the reasons why the game is held to such high regards today, as this is just one example of the vast interconnected storylines that can occur in this game. But it would be foolish to talk about Origins without talking about another staple that comes with all BioWare games, the cast. At this point, BioWare was already on a hot streak when it came to characters that players fell in love with. People were simping for Bastila and Liara before they even knew what those words meant.
Don't make me laugh, you got to simp.
And they would continue with the well-rounded ensemble cast in Origins. Now granted, not all of them were amazing. Ogren's only real saving grace is that he's voiced by Steve Bloom, but he fills his quota as funny dwarf character.
Stick
I don't know, man. I think Ogren's cool.
with the classics. Lear and drool.
The cast still came with rich personalities that varied from each person, making it fun to learn about them and what they had to say about the places you traveled. Liliana, for example, is a bard thief who has traveled to so many different locations and is almost always able to tell you about what that location is about. Sten, on the other hand, is completely the opposite. He is the sole member of the Kunari in your gang, where everyone else will have a lot to say. He has little to nothing to say, at least at first, which is a nice look into his culture and how the Kunari operate. Zevran is also a fun character to have around. Some might dismiss
Wait, let me
him as horny bisexual elf rogue, and don't get me wrong, there's more than one instance where he is exactly that. But he still has some great dialogue moments with the other characters, which is where his best moments come in.
Orzamar's archives are hardly an authority on Orzamar's archives.
I'm just cheered by the thought that you might have picked up a book at some point. And then there's Wynn. I don't like Wynn. She's
He's not gonna like him. He's gonna scream, and I'm just skipping that part because I don't want my audio to peak or whatever. So yeah, throughout all of that, he hasn't really like established what makes the companions the companions. All he's really said is that they believable and they feel real and stuff like that. At least hinting at those kind of things, right? And this is a very specific point that I think you should all remember. He says this like to Sten, right? About Sten, that hey, he doesn't have a lot to say about the Kunari. Which I don't necessarily think is untrue, but I think is like Sten has a lot to say about the Kun and the Kunari in general, but he's not like the authorial, you know, he's not the authority on that subject, right? In one of Sten's dialogues, you can ask him directly about what is a Kun, and he will like just say to you, ask a Tamathran, which is their priests, right? And you can ask him that, and it's like, well, why can't you tell me? You know, like, well, it's on my place to tell you, right? Which is like clear evidence that the Kun is not what Sten tells us is not everything about the Kun, nor is it like accurate to what the Kun actually is. He's just telling us what he knows about it, and his perspective could be flawed, which is another thing that's a part of the Dragon Age's identity, which is differing perspectives and how these perspectives can, you know, like inform a lot of different things, or like, how do you say, that different perspectives can reveal different secrets, right? So obviously, for example, for Sten, right, his perspective on the Qun is from more the warrior side. But if you ask Tamarin, their perspective on the Qun is different from him, right? That's fine, and whatnot.
Morgan and Alistair. Let's start out with my boy Alistair first. Out of all the Bioware games that I have played, Alistair is my favorite first companion character. When I first picked it up, I expected them to be the same type of character as Karth and Kaden. While I would never say they are bad characters, I feel like they very quickly get overshadowed by the other people you pick up. But Alistair is not that. He is one of the most fleshed out characters in the series. When you meet him, he seems like a wise-ass joker, and for a game with dark and depressing tones, that's completely fine, as it's nice to have some humor to break the tension, but you later learn that he is the bastard son who is the true heir to the throne after the death of King Kaelin, and he becomes one of the prime choices for who can rule Ferelden. There's just one problem. Alistair doesn't want to rule. He doesn't see himself as a leader at all. He looks up to Duncan as a mentor, and after he dies, he looks up at you as you are the last person he's got left in the Grey Wardens. Alistair is a great twist on the typical fantasy trope. He's the typical bastard king who is the rightful ruler, but instead of rising up to the occasion, he shies away from it, preferring to live a life free of the responsibility of a king. It's a very understanding motivation that makes him an incredibly likable character. He's funny and well-meaning, and depending on how you treat him, is someone that will have your back to the end. On the other hand, we have Morgan, who is probably the second most famous character Claudia Black has played. The daughter of Flemeth, the Witch of the Wilds! Excuse me.
Well,
She is the second
power,
main companion you will meet on your adventure. First seen pestering your group of Grey Wardens when you come out through the woods looking for old documents, but after the Darkspawn battle, she saves you and her mother assigns her to travel with you to stop the Blight. At first, she seems like an incredibly cruel and mean-spirited person, but there's a good reason for why she's like that. You see, Morgan is someone who was raised with a survivalist mindset. She only believes it is necessary to help someone, and they will give you something in return. If you help someone for nothing, then she sees it as wasting your resources. She also gives a very interesting look on a mage. Most of the mages in this game go to the Mage's Circle, which is heavily guarded by Templars, because mages are fucking crazy.
Now, he does mention it throughout this whole bit, which is there are different perspectives that kind of like tell you different things about different factions, but that's like the focus on like why I think Bioware's like very strong point to them is their characters, because you know they tell stories through characters, meaning that their perspectives help shape the world and make it a lot more interesting and compelling, right? He fails to like really register the fact that Alistair is like a warden, and when he tells you about warden stuff, it's from his perspective. It's not always right, you know? And he doesn't know everything. Like, at the end of the game, like, he's blindsided because he didn't know that, hey, if a Grey Warden kills an Archdemon, the Grey Warden dies because the Archdemon is trying to find a soul to, you know, possess, because, you know, that's how it works. But then if it comes into contact with the Grey Warden, they both try to clash, and then the spirits, like, in ensuing fight just, like, explode and whatnot, causing the Archdemon to die, but also to the Warden to die. Mel. But he doesn't really say that, and that's kind of a crucial part of all of Bioware's characters, not just their companions, but all of them, because, hey, they are, like, about characters, and using these characters to tell the stories, right? And the stories they tell are very interesting. He does say that, like, hey, Alistair has a really interesting story, same with, like, Morrigan and whatnot, but he doesn't really make that point, which I think is very weak, because it does come off a bit rambly of, yeah, they're cool because of X, Y, and Z reason. Which is, like, fine, I think, but it doesn't really firmly establish and make it very clear that this is why.
You know 40k lore, you can see why. Magnus did a lot wrong, Cope and Seed, and she hates the idea of the circle. She doesn't like the idea of being restrained with her potential. She wants to expand her knowledge without any restrictions. She also has some of the best dialogue with everyone. She is relentless in the shit she says.
What do you people see in him?
See in whom?
In the warden.
Jealous, are we?
Jealous of him? Ah.
Of course. A handsome man with women falling over him. It must be very difficult for you to handle. I do not blame you your envy, however, especially considering that the chances of any woman who is not struck both blind and dumb of providing you the attention you crave is slight.
Quiet you. You can't get under my skin.
Were I you, I would simply give up all hope of knowing another woman at all. Or have you already? A wise move, if so.
Forget I said anything.
Trust me, dwarf, I already have.
But her main goal is something that I wasn't expecting. So the Grey Wardens have a pretty big responsibility. Whenever there's a blight, the Grey Wardens are the only ones that can fully kill the Archdemon. But in turn, it also results in the death of whoever dealt the final blow because of their tainted blood that allows them to sense the Darkspawn. And it also makes them have nightmares and shortens their lifespan to 30 years if you're lucky. Yeah, it's a pretty raw deal. He's not being a Witcher was bad. However, Morrigan gives you an offer. Or Alistair, depending on the circumstance. Put a baby in her. Instead of the soul of the Archdemon being destroyed with the killer, it will go to her unborn child instead, creating a child of an old god. This plays into her mindset of helping people if they are able to give something in return. And that's exactly what she's doing here. She is saving yours and Alistair's lives in exchange of giving her a kid with immense power. I could go on, but I think I've made my point. The characters in this game are incredibly deep and have tons of depth behind them. In addition, the game...
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, because I also think that, like, you know, Dragon Age Origins has, like, pretty great characters, but I don't necessarily think he fundamentally addresses on why specifically, right? Like, yeah, sure, all of that is there, but in service of what, you know? Like, what is it all, like, leading towards? We can have cool characters and whatnot, but if these characters are just, like, in isolation, then all we really need is just those characters in scenarios fitting them. But what makes them interesting, to me at least, is that these characters give us insights into different parts of the world. And let's just finish here.
The game also has 4 romance options, and they have, at this point, become a staple in Bioware games. Alistair for female wardens, Morgan for male wardens, then Liliana.
Yeah, skipping this before he peeks it again.
It's nice as well.
But yeah, he just talks about romance as well, and like you can sort of see he doesn't really talk about like the characters as in given perspectives. He does it a bit with Morgan, but that's more, I think, more of an incidental thing rather than intentional thing. And again, he with Liliana, what I wanted to mention as well, that Liliana like gives us a sort of perspective on the Chantry in a spiritual way, right? Which none of the other like characters who are part of the Chantry really does. It's more like practical. We see it from the laws that are written and that kind of stuff, but we never really see it from the more abstract sense, right? And Liliana gives that perspective. It's interesting, you know, it makes the Chantry a little more compelling. But again, this point isn't made, which I think like is a failure of this video and does lead him to make poor points later on during this video.
Unfortunately, Zevran's is the only relationship that doesn't work out. Sorry to all the guys and girls who are hoping for a long-lasting relationship with our elf rogue, but our boy is a fling, nothing more. Also, I'll go ahead and say that Morgan is the best option. On top of being a witchgoth GF, she is the...
And yeah, that is for this section of it. Additionally, he's going to talk about some of the DLC stuff, but for one, he doesn't mention a lot of the DLCs in any real depth, you know. He just talks about it like, yeah, they exist, some of them are cool, some of them are not, whatever. And the issue that I have with it is that he doesn't really examine it to see how the identity of Dragon Age evolves over time. You know, what it, like gameplay-wise or art style-wise or story-wise, he doesn't really use it as a jumping off point out. And as we can see here, maybe a shift occurred. So, for example, Dragon Age Awakening has a lot of enemies to fight, and there are a lot of low-level enemies. The Grey Warden is at their height of their power. It is them with all their abilities and some extra new ones that they can unlock to level 30, right? But for the moment, they are like very powerful. And a lot of encounters in Dragon Age Awakening is you just killing a lot of guys, like really a huge amount of guys. And that can necessarily mean, hey, we can see this sort of shift from a sort of tactical looking over the battlefield and choosing what to do to more of like you just spamming AoE spells, which is prevalent and relevant for Dragon Age 2, because Dragon Age 2 has a lot more enemies that are about and has you rely on more AoE spells because of it. And that's not a point that is made. It's like a bad point that I feel like it's a point that he could have made that would have been relevant, but he left it on the table because he didn't really examine the, you know, DLCs that much. He did talk about like, you know, Witch Hunt and whatnot, but again, he doesn't really talk about it more in depth other than like, cool to see Morgan. I went with Morgan in my Goth GF, which is like fine, I guess.
What do you want to know?
Everything. Start at the beginning.
I will continue to dumb speed because it's again another be a long
2010 was another incredible year for Bioware. Mass Effect 2 had just come out and people loved it. It was praised yet again for its story and characters. Some even consider it better than the original.
Yeah, skipping so
Scores
it
by
doesn't get
critics.
bad.
User score even today is down to a 4 on Metacritic. There were countless videos on why people hated this game.
One point here, this guy hates it, this guy hates it. This guy actually likes it more than Origins. I don't know why he put this guy here, because this guy actually likes Dragon Age 2 a bit more than Origins.
Calling it the worst Bioware game at the time, and even naming it the Catalyst. No, not you, fuck off! That began Bioware's descent into the downward spiral. But there was another problem that Bioware was facing, something that was present even during Mass Effect 2.
More peaking audio.
Many people like to ignore it with Mass Effect 2, but this is where Bioware's RPG mechanics really started to dwindle. Compared to the main story to Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2.
Now here's the thing, right? He doesn't really say what mechanics have like been, you know, what RPG mechanics have like gone down from Mass Effect 1 to 2. But let him just let him finish.
And you'll start to see that player choice really starts to loosen. The games become less about making decisions in the world, influencing companions and the galaxy as a whole, and more about being an action game.
Now he doesn't really say like or use an example of how that actually is the case, right? So being vague doesn't really help his point because like, well, what specifically about Mass Effect 2 lacks the choices of Mass Effect 1? And additionally, it also again betrays his understanding of, you know, BioWare and the RPGs they make, as that they're about like making choices, you know, but they were never really about that. It's about like using the RPG mechanics to tell stories, right? And the story that Mass Effect 2 is telling, well, it used its RPG mechanics to tell its story, right? You recruited different companions and you could do their missions, and if you didn't do those missions, well, you saw the results of that, right? And that was using the mechanics of RPGs to, you know, facilitate a story, which is the thing that this guy doesn't really like understand, and why it leads to a lot of like bad criticisms from his part.
And that design would bleed into Dragon Age 2. Right from the beginning of the game, problems start to arrive. Remember back in Origins how you had a choice between 3 different races and 6 different backgrounds?
Now this is like a part of Dragon Age 2 that like fails to sort of be in line with Dragon Age Inquisition. No, Dragon Age Origins, alongside like the sort of gameplay similarities or the sort of overall gameplay look.
Well, this game decreases it by having you restricted to a human character. And while you can alter their sex and class, they will always
Which quickly to say is a point in his favor, and like some like things I can agree with him.
be known as Hawk, which is suspiciously similar to another BioWare protagonist. Now, this isn't all bad. There are still changes to the story throughout the game depending on the class you pick, the most prominent one being the sibling you spend the most time with. With that being said, let's go through the opening. So in this game, you play as a son or daughter of the Hawk family who are trying to escape from the Darkspawn that attacks your village. Your brother or sister dies defending your mother from a monster, and you quickly get onto a boat with Aveline Valen, and you sail to the city of Kirkwall. Oh right, I almost forgot. So the story is being told
Okay, now we're skipping a lot of this, because a lot of this is again just like plot synopsis, some stuff I agree with, and whatnot, some stuff I disagree with, but let's just get to the main point over here.
either as allies or as enemies. So a lot of crazy shit happens in Act 2. You find out what a Kunari mage looks like and how they treat their mages. Now, you're probably wondering, didn't the Kunari look like this?
Oh wait, hold on. I went to the wrong timestamp. Hold on. Think
Dragon Age 2 is set in the same place over the course of a couple of years. Each how you met Hawk and what they went through. So anyway, you get to Kirk. Oh right, I almost forgot. So this hired gave a pretty cool idea. In theory. So for those of you who don't know, this game was in development for not the time skips. But it really doesn't. Other than where Hawk's home is, the landscape stays pretty a lot more tactical with companions. Now Dragon Age 2 has a similar combat system, and the main thing that they focus on is making the combat a lot more fast.
which is this one I wanted to say, which is very interesting, because I wanted to point out, it's very interesting from say because a lot of people who dislike Dragon Age 2 will say Dragon Age 2 has like no similarities to Dragon Age Origins, but it's interesting that this guy says there is, and that's true, right? Dragon Age 2's like combat is basically Dragon Age Origins, just like looks different and is tuned differently, you know? Instead of more of a symmetrical balance, it's an asymmetrical balance. The player has a lot of low health, but a lot of damage, right? Like a huge amount of damage. But the enemies have a lot of little damage and a lot of health, which is an inverse from like what Origins is, right? But it's still like fundamentally the same system. So it's an interesting, you know, that he makes this point.
Fast-paced and aggressive. So that means that a big part of this game is going from one enemy to the other, chaining a bunch of attacks and abilities into each other. The animations are a lot faster from the characters. They dash and jump around and move way faster, which makes the fights pretty cool and entertaining. And it does make the fights a little bit more intense as it's just a giant mosh pit of you and your companions just beating the hell out of everybody. However, so remember when I said that the combat in Origins can get annoying in dungeon crawls because there are a lot of enemies and it gets tedious? Well, the plus side is that they were at the very least in groups. So you kill a group of enemies, then after a fight you can heal, recover mana, whatever, and then go on to the next fight.
Now this is where he's going to make the point of like, there's a lot of enemies in Dragon Age 2 and they just come quickly, right? But he doesn't really, like, since he didn't cover Awakening, it's a bit of an issue because, hey, he doesn't cover Awakening and, you know, like, he could have made that point, you know, on how it seemed like BioWare was drifting somewhere else, you know?
Fight in Dragon Age. Evading. Dragon Age 2 is also...
So...
Why aren't you drinking okay? Also, take Anders with you. Like, everywhere we're actually able to fully customize your companions. So I really don't like this, because every time I find an armor set, instead of giving it to someone to make them better, it goes straight to the shop.
Let me just quickly here. I know, very professional.
Remember, buying is just some stuff in the beginning of the game and stocking up on potions. No, I don't buy runes. I'm not good with them, okay? Leave me alone. Way more of a side story where the focus is way more on the its own plot, but it all ultimately lack of an overall theme to it. So, Origin of the city of Kirkwall, and I personally think that this game does a decent job at conveying this feeling of unfamiliarity with the environment in Act 1. But the thing about the main quest is that there's a lack of an overall theme to it. So, Origins had an overarching plot of the Blight and Darkspawn coming to kill everybody, while Loghain was corrupting the kingdom. And each area you went to had its own plot, but it all ultimately related to the goal of getting people on your side to fight the Darkspawn. Dragon Age 2 doesn't really have that.
That's a weird thing to say. Especially when saying like, let's listen to that again.
That there's a lack of an overall theme to it. So, Origins had an overarching plot of the Blight and Darkspawn coming to kill everybody, while Loghain was corrupting the kingdom. And each area you went to had its own plot, but it all ultimately related to the goal of getting people on your side to fight the Darkspawn. Dragon Age 2 doesn't really have this. It's way more of a side story where the focus is...
And that's a weird thing to say, because like, if Dragon Age is not like that, then it's just something else, you know? Now you can say that like, since it's not like Dragon Age Origins, it is therefore buckling against the identity of Dragon Age, but here's the thing, right? That's not a bad thing though, right? Like, I don't necessarily think having the game not follow the same sort of plot structure and plot ideas that the previous game said is like a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing, right? If this was like, you know, Dragon Age Origins 2 in a literal sense where you play as the Warden, the hero for Alden again, then yeah, it would be of a different situation. But this is a new character with a new plot, and you can, you know, it's fine. And that's the point of Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age 2's plot is a lot low stakes. It's just Hawk trying to live their life, you know? And about like Dragon Age 2 having no themes, that's also a weird thing to say, because like it does have themes. Like, you can't not have themes in a video game, you know, or any media for that matter. Like, and you can say, oh, but it's not as pronounced or it's not as well established. No, it is. Dragon Age 2's like themes is generally about like degradation and like this sort of idea of carrying on, right? Like no matter what happens to Hawk, to their family, whatever, they keep moving, right? There's no point to the game where Hawk just like dies and stops. Hawk keeps on moving. It's relentless, you know, no matter what happens. And additionally, it's about like finding a new family for Hawk as well, establishing that. And you can do that, you know, and that's like part of the themes of Dragon Age 2, you know. So it's a weird thing for him to say this because like it's just a lie, you know, and also it's like very bad because, you know, again, like bad criticism, right?
Way more on the companion than building on the world. Well, at least part of it. It doesn't tell the story effectively. At least I don't think so. It does at first, but it kind of...
And again, that's another weird thing. Like, it doesn't tell it effectively. Like, what do you think the story is trying to tell, dude? Like, it tells it effectively enough. It's Hawk living his life. And obviously, stories that are like similar, like slices of life, which I don't necessarily think Dragon Age 2 is, but it's more similar to that, I guess, aren't going to have like that sort of like end goal in mind. You know, they're not going to have that destination that Dragon Age Origins have. Its destination is when the character can no longer continue, you know?
falls off towards the end. It's not like it's a story about how greed corrupts and destroys the people around you. If anything, it just tells about how Hawk became the champion of Kirkwall. It's a very shallow story compared to Origins. It actually reminds me a lot...
Okay, and this is another weird thing. Like that's like one, it's not a shallow story. It's just Hawk trying to live their life and trying to continue on, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a story like that. And to call it shallow is to imply that it's not deep at all. It's just deep in a different way. You know, a shallow story to me is a story that doesn't really engage with its own ideas, right? And Dragon Age 2 is not that. Dragon Age 2 engages with its ideas. What Dragon Age 2 is doing is not shallow, it's just a different kind of deep, you know?
Of the story of Mass Effect 2, because the story in that game is a sidetrack of the other main games, and exists to build up the world and draw on the characters. But this was fine for Mass Effect because players were invested and wanted more from this galaxy. And like I mentioned before, Mass Effect had the same character.
And again, that's like a weird implication to say like, oh, no one was invested in Dragon Age, like the setting of Dragon Age, right? And like when he's gonna say he is like, oh, and then you have reoccurring characters. I'm like, my man, like I feel like this is more of a you problem than like an issue with the game itself. You know, if the game itself is like if the game is focusing on like the setting itself, people who are interested in that setting will always be interested in that setting. I'm interested in it. I think it's cool. But if you're not interested in the setting, then that's like a different thing entirely, you know? And as for the characters being the same, again, this is where he's going to try to establish the point of like, Dragon Age is not like this. Each game is its own like thing and trying to do its own thing, or like a connected saga, right? Like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't particularly get this point. You know, Dragon Age 2 is definitely disconnected from Dragon Age Origins. And 2 and Inquisition's connections are... they're there, but like it's not. You don't necessarily need to play 2 to understand Inquisition. I don't know.
Characters that connected the trilogy together. Now, Dragon Age 2 does make a good move to move on from the Darkspawn and Grey Wardens, even though they still...
Also, this is another point I wanted to give it to him, because like so many Dragon Age Origins fans just hate the fact that the Dragon Age series just is no longer about the Blights and like related stuff. It's interesting.
Do have a presence. And I think this is a good call, as this is a big world and it deserves to have new concepts and regions to introduce. However, this is also where BioWare wanted to make the series into a connected saga. It mainly comes in Act 3, and we'll talk about that shortly. The RPG
Oh, yeah. Well.
mechanics also took a nosedive in variety. In Origins, you had a wide variety of dialogue options to choose from, and you weren't being bogged down.
Okay. So, obviously I can't really do this without this, like, play Bobby in the way. But, just for you to know. Wait, hold on. We'll reverse this. So he's going to show, right, how the RPG mechanics have gone down. And what we're going to show here, he's going to show here is 4 options. These 4 options are going to be, I stand with you, Zathrian, I stand with you, Zathrian, I hate you, Zathrian, and I hate you, Zathrian. These are like, these are 2 options, disguised as 4 options. These are not huge, complicated, large amount of options, large amount of ways to say something. These are like 4 options that are disguised as 2 options. Or like 2 options disguised as 4 options. And that is something I don't get. This guy could have chosen any dialogue within the entire game, but all he did was he chose the ones that was 4 options disguised as 2 options. And that I don't particularly get. You know, Origins and, you know, BioWare in general are not about many ways to say something. It's about playing as someone and having the choices you do have be a lot more meaningful and impactful. He mentions about like how each of the Origins makes you feel different. and when you revisit the previous locations you were in, it feels different. That's true, right? But that's only accomplished when you have a game that, allows you to play as someone. And that's the point, and that's the charm of Dragon Age, right? That's the thing that makes it so good. And that's what is consistent with Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition. You play as someone.
Again, Dragon Age 2 copies a little too much from Mass Effect and implements their own morality system into the game. Now, this isn't
a morality system. Now, this is like the dumbest thing I've heard throughout this entire video. I mean, we'll get to it eventually. But a morality system. What is this guy talking about? The only morality system that BioWare has had was like in KOTOR, right? With the light side and dark side. That was the only like morality system. Jade Empire was a philosophy and kind of morality system. And that's mainly because when you have a philosophy, it's inherently going to also talk about morality. But it's more of a philosophy than anything else. And then Mass Effect is not a morality system. It's a, mode of operation and a reputation system, right? Because, so here's the thing. In Mass Effect, throughout the entire thing, you will unlock, those Paragon Renegade options when you meet the requirements. Now, the reason is not because, like, oh, Shepard just doesn't have the words, he fumbles a bit or whatever. No, it's because he is not they are not perceived as a renegade or a paragon, right? When Shepard is perceived as a renegade and paragon, people will treat them as such. And so if a renegade Shepard says something in a paragon Shepard way, no one's gonna believe him, right? Because like he's a renegade, he's not a paragon. He's not gonna that doesn't mean much of anything, and vice versa. Dragon Age 2 is not a morality system. It's not even any of those previous systems. It's not a philosophy system. It's not a mode of operations or a reputation system. It's just a personality system. And that's it. It's just going through the three like RPG archetypes of dialogue choices and of having a nice guy, a neutral dude, and like mean dude, right? And even then, like Dragon Age has the other ones, which are the middle one, which is the purple option, is charming or humorous, and the top one is diplomatic or diplomatic or helpful. The bottom one is stern or judgmental, right? And like that's like Dragon Age's like system. And yeah, sure, it's in the dialogue wheel. It looks like a dialogue wheel. It is whatever, but like it's not a morality system, and it's not like similar to Mass Effect because you choosing those options doesn't really affect the ability to choose other options, right? What it does is affect like dialogue that Hawk says, right, without your input, right? If you're a humorous Hawk throughout the entire time, like Hawk will, when you're not choosing the dialogue, he'll say humorous things without your input. Like that's something, right? But like, I don't get why this guy says this. It's like needlessly dumb and makes his video seem like a lot more like less well thought out, It makes any criticisms he really makes seem like he's just saying it to say it, And to say that like this is now, hey, it seems like Dragon Age has lost its RPG mechanics by not having like a large amount of options. When he shows in the previous one, 4 options disguised as 2. It's like Dragon Age was never that to begin with. There is no dialogue option in any of the Dragon Age games, in any of Dragon Age Origins, I mean, where like the 4 options actually are 4 distinct options, where the 5 options sometimes they have are 5 distinct options. Some of them have like more than 3 outcomes, right? But a large amount of those are end of main quest line options, right? Not like casual ones, right? And this is the thing, I think he just doesn't really understand what like Dragon Age is about or what it's trying to do. And this is the frustrating part of it, because it's like you have like good takes on other things and things that are reasonable to say, but then you fumble at these things,
as extreme as the Paragon Renegade bars, but it's a similar concept. Basically, you have 3 choices with Hawk's personality: diplomatic and helpful, humorous and charming, aggressive and direct. And you're encouraged to commit to one of these, as they will also affect how Hawk will respond without the player's input as well. And it's honestly kind of infuriating to deal with, because now instead of making decisions in the moment and choosing what you think is right, you're now picking between colors.
No, my man, it's weird that he keeps saying this, right? Because it's like that's not how it really works, Like, this is how Hawk talks. This is how Hawk, will interact. And again, you're playing as a character, and that's what always been like about the Dragon Age series. When you play in, Dragon Age Origins, you play like as a character, right? Because you literally have an origin to yourself. You have a prescribed family, friends, and like ideas that you have, You know, it's dumb to me to say this, because it's like, have we played the same game? You know, are we actually talking about the same thing, or are you just talking about something that you think is the same thing? You know.
Now, I'm not against morality systems. There are games that implement them in a way that work.
It's not a morality system. It's just a personality system, dude. And like, all RPGs have this. It's just more telegraphed in Dragon Age 2. Like, Dragon Age Origins has a personality system. You can be mean, you can be nice, you can be, humorous. It just doesn't telegraph it, you know? And if the issue is telegraphing it, then I don't know, dude. Like, say that then instead.
As in, knowing if they were in Mass Effect, players could at least have the consistency of, this person is cool, be nice to them. This person is mean, punch them. Now, give credit where credit is due, the game is not absent of choice. In fact, major choices in this game are where...
And again, this is weird, right? Because it's like, okay, well, I mean, yeah, sure, the dialogue options are great, but there's still choices as well. It's weird, right? And especially, like, in contrast with other Dragon Age stuff, it's like, wow, you make a good point, you know? Like, wow.
Where it really shines, and there are still consequences to different outcomes throughout the story. One of the infamous ones in the game is the fate of Hawk's surviving sibling in the Deep Roads, but I'll get to that once we talk about Act 1. Here you can see that the complexity of the previous game are still present, even if most of the game is steering away from it. While it is undoubtedly less varied than Origins, there are still elements that encourage multiple playthroughs. And honestly, I would say that this game is a lot more replayable than Inquisition. This game really highlights the importance of the people you take in your party, as there are now dialogue options that will appear where you can ask a particular member advice on what they would do, or even let them take the lead, which is pretty damn cool. Now, this wasn't absent in Origins. There were plenty of times where companions would chime in and express their opinions on what you should do. But in the end, the decisions were always left up to you, and it would affect your approval rating with them, depending on what you ended up picking. This is more highlighted in Dragon Age 2, and while I do prefer the Origins companions, this makes the party seem much more independent. With that praise being said, something we need to talk about is a very divisive problem that doesn't just come with this game, but a lot of modern games now. Voiced protagonists. Whenever this topic comes up, there's always a lot of conflicting opinions on the matter. There are those who think voiced protagonists have no place in RPGs and feel as though that by default, they limit a decision in a conversation. And honestly, it is fair to see why they think that. Mass Effect was a great game.
Now, here's the thing, right? The idea of it limits decisions and choices, right, is very dumb to me, because it fails to understand what, like, the point of an RPG is. The point of an RPG is you're playing a specific role and you're expressing that role, right, through like narrative and through narrative and mechanics, right? And like, what Bioware has done is just like narrow the kind of role you're playing, and then like the game is about that, you know. Just because Fallout New Vegas has you playing as like, allows you to play as many different kind of characters and therefore express yourselves in many different kinds of ways, because, you know, like, playing as many different kind of characters with many means that you will have many different ways to respond or act in those roles or act in that way, does not mean that what Bioware does is like not an RPG as well, or like is like not offering choices. Because what it is just like you're playing as a specific character, and those characters, you know, will have specific ways to react, specific options for themselves, and that's fine, you know. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. Like, and I just don't get this, you know. And this is again a failure to like recognize what Bioware has been doing, right? Dragon Age Origins had this since the beginning. Like, I'm gonna let him finish just to get to his next point.
They ruined a lot of future RPGs, because after that, every game had to be Mass Effect.
Ruined a lot of RPGs. What do you mean, dude? How did it ruin other RPGs? Like, let's assume that these other RPGs, like the one he's saying, like Horizon Zero Dawn, is like a bad RPG, right? Let's assume that. I'm not gonna talk about that. I'm just assuming, right? How is it Bioware's fault? Like, how is it Bioware's fault for doing that? Is it Bethesda's fault for all the terrible open world games that happened after Skyrim? Was it really Bethesda's fault? And again, this is like, what was Bioware supposed to do? Not do what they were doing? Like, not make Mass Effect? Like, what? Dude, like, the solution you're, like, implicitly saying is, hey, all these RPGs that exist after Bioware and were inspired by Bioware, like, are terrible and awful. They shouldn't exist, and Bioware shouldn't have done what they did. It's like, no, dude. Blame the other developers. It's their fault, not Bioware's fault for doing it. Like, I don't get it, you know? Like, what is with this, like, bad, like, critique of, like, video gaming trends? It's not the fault of the person who made the trend. It's the fault of the people who follow the trend, you know? Like, man, dude. Like, and this isn't, like, something that, like, happens with any other studio. You will not see people blaming Bethesda for, like, the open world, like, bonanza that happened after Skyrim, right? I mean, you'll see some of them, but, like, for most of them, you won't see it. And that's because I think they recognize that it's not, you know, Bethesda's fault. It's the other developers' fault for making bad open worlds, you know? Was it, like, Doom's fault for the many terrible and shitty boomer shooters that happened afterwards? No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It's just those games were terrible, you know? So, like, why is Bioware being stuck with this? And this is only being done because of like all like bitter RPG fans who hate the fact that like Bioware makes games that people like, you know? And there's no other explanation for it in my head. Because I cannot, like, assume that you can see what Bioware's doing and not see it as an RPG and be fine with it, right? These people want a specific kind of RPG, and that's like Fallout New Vegas. Now, this guy is a bit different. I'm not going to assume what he wants. But, like, that is what a lot of these bitter RPG fans, like, hate about Bioware. They hate the fact that, like, RPGs are now being inspired by it, and the RPGs they like are becoming less and less, which is like a valid point to make, right? It does suck that like less games are being made in the style you want, you know? But like blaming BioWare for it is not the solution, you know? It's not the solution. The solution is just like buying games that are like the ones you want and trying to make sure that they see success.
Every game needed a dialogue wheel and a voice protagonist. It caused games like Fallout 4 to stray away from the original concept.
Yeah, and again, that's Bethesda's fault. Bethesda's fault for doing that. That's like Ubisoft's fault for doing that. It's not Bioware's fault. It's Ubisoft. It's Bethesda's fault.
To become even more exhausting, and hell, even Bioware copied their own design into their own games.
Yeah, that's what happens when a studio develops a style. They tend to do it all over the place, you know? I imagine there are a lot of similarities with Dragon Age Origins and Mass Effect 1 because they're made by the same people. They have this sort of same style. Like, I don't know, man.
In both Code Wars and Origins, the player's dialogue is only read, not heard. And in this sense, it made players feel more connected to their characters because they were able to imagine their own voices in the situation they were in.
Yeah, but you want your character. Your character was never yours. You had like ownership on your character in some ways, but the ownership never lied with you. When BioWare had the opening cutscenes for all those Origins, you were no longer the author, the sole author for your character, because BioWare had a hand in it. BioWare controlled what your character like backstory was. You couldn't decide any of that, you know? And that has been true since Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. You were Gorian's Ward, and you were the Balespawn. Sure, you could be like any race and any class, but you were fundamentally still that. You can not choose to do that.
Now, I'm not saying that voice protagonists are a bad thing or shouldn't exist. In Mass Effect, while it did popularize the concept, it wasn't the first RPG to have a voice protagonist. The Witcher did it around the same time, and Deus Ex did it way before, and people love those games. And hell, Hockey's even that bad. Both the voice actors do great jobs with their performances.
Someday I'd like to go 1 week without meeting an insane mage. Just 1 week.
Chances are we won't find anything but even more darkspawn and rubble. Maybe both?
But this is where the identity of Dragon Age starts to get lost with time. While the world was
And again, like, how though? Like, you still played a character in... Again, like, I'm just repeating myself at this point.
intriguing, and the history was interesting, it's losing its touch on what made Origins so good. Origins was meant to connect new and old players, create a simple plot with simple mechanics, but can still be enjoyed by veterans of the genre. So if someone wanted to get invested in the world and feel like a scrappy adventurer with a ragtag group of friends, they can do that. But they want a fun game to piss off everyone and have a little fun being a bad guy, they can do that too. Dragon Age 2, on the other hand, feels even more streamlined. It's trying too hard to keep the player's attention with action rather than a combination of action and story. But...
And again, that's weird. Like, I don't get it, dude. Like, was Dragon Age Origins sort of like a bridge between old and new RPG mechanics? Yeah, sure, I guess, you know. But, like, I still feel like that prescribes that, like, Dragon Age Origins was more of, like, a game about freedom, player freedom and stuff, than it actually was.
To get into that, we actually have to go through the story.
Now, this is just a bunch of plot synopsis. We're gonna go through here.
How they show this. I like seeing interactions between other companions because it shows that they are growing as well, either as allies or as enemies. So, a lot of crazy shit happens in Act 2. You find out what a Kunari mage looks like and how they treat their mages. Now, you're probably wondering, didn't the Kunari look like this? Why the fuck do they look like this now? And yeah, it's pretty fucking jarring. But that's not the only thing that changed.
Again, he doesn't really research this. He doesn't really, like, see why. And if he does, he's gonna see why, like, oh, because they were always meant to be like that. Kunari were always meant to have horns. The reason they couldn't do it in Dragon Age Origins was some, like, engine technical limitations. I don't know the specifics, just that's it is. And they added the horns back because that's what the Kunari have. Like, they were being in line with lore, you know?
So our only window into the Kunari in the first game was Sten, and when you talked to him, he had a very reserved personality, and would rarely talk about himself or his people. But when you finally got through to him, he would explain that Kunari have a very survivalistic and accepting mindset. He talks about how each member of their race accepts their role regardless of what it is. Now, when we first meet Sten, he is locked up after the murder of a family.
Now, there was some... Wait, hold on.
And he did this because he was freaking out at the fact that he was in a new place and surrounded by a race of people that he's not familiar with. While what he did was terrible, I can at least see the reason why he did it.
Okay, that's, like, so fucking dumb, dude. Like, I'm sorry. Like, what? Like, he was a scared little baby who was, like, who didn't know where he was. Like, he was so scared. Like, what do you mean, dude? No. Sten freaked out because he lost his fucking sword. Why was he freaking out because he lost his sword? Well, because his sword was part of his, like, identity, basically. It was part of his soul, essentially. You know, that's how the Kunari culture works. That sword was made for him, and since he lost it, he went into a rage. Like, that's why he was. Which is, again, now let's go back to what he says. And he says, like, this guy says, specifically, that the Kunari have, like, a survivalist and accepting, like, mindset. Which is, like, somewhat true, but, like, also wrong, because like what the Kunari have as a Kun is that you accept your place in society, right? Sen has a lot of banter about like different characters and saying that like, hey, why are you doing this? You know, he does this for like the females, right? And he says like, hey, you are a warrior, why are you, you know, why are you a warrior and a woman? You know, that cannot be, right? And like, okay, cool. There are roles within this Kunari society that people have to accept, and if they deviate from it, it's wrong fundamentally, right? Now, here's the thing, right? If Sten says that, right, and Sten can say this as well to Win and Morgan. He can say to Win and Morgan, you cannot be females and a mage. He says that directly to them. And now, when you hear that, what is the mindset that there are no female mages for Kunaris? That is like a can of worms that does not make sense at all. With any brain that you have, you must understand that what Sten is more referring to is the concept of gender roles and tying it to, you know, societal roles like warriors or mages and stuff. And again, when he talks about mages, he talks about, you know, cutting their tongues off. When the guy talks about like, oh, we finally know what a Kunari mage looks like, it's like, well, we already had an idea of that. Kunari, like Sten literally says, like mages in the Kun get their tongues cut off, and like I think he also says like they get their eyes gouged, right? And like, okay, cool, you know, we have an idea, right? And like, and he calls them beasts. He doesn't refer to them in any like pronoun ways, right? So what that tells me, and like with anyone with a functioning brain, is that the Kunari assign gender roles alongside like other roles as well. So if you're a warrior, you're a man. Like, so if you are like the tallest female Kunari in existence, you have the muscle mass of a fucking brick, okay? Like, you will be a warrior. You will be a warrior. And you will be referred to as a man. Because because the Kunari do not align gender with sex, right? They see gender as a role you perform. And men perform the warrior roles. Well, for women perform, you know, like domestic roles. And this is like a fundamental misunderstanding of what Sten says, and a lack of thought of what this guy does. Now, he doesn't like do the weird mistake of like going into Inquisition and saying like, why is Krem a trans man, right? He doesn't do that, luckily enough. But he does still fundamentally misunderstand like the Kunari.
When we look at the circumstances that he found himself in. The Kunari in this game are roided out murdering douchebags. So this quest with the Kunari
and again, which is a weird thing, because Sten was also a bit of a douchebag, you know? Like, oftentimes in Sten's dialogue, he literally says, yeah, when one day we come back and conquer all of you and subjugate you into the Kun, I will be sad when I see you on the battlefield. Like, he says that, you know? Like, Sten does not have any reservations with conquering everyone and then converting them to the Kun. We have codex entries in Dragon Age Origins that talks about Riveni and how Riveni was under Kunari occupation, and how a lot of the, you know, residents of Riveni were converted from their own like local religion or the Chantry to the Kun, right? And like, it also talks about camps, literal conversion camps. Like, the Kunari have always been douchebags. This guy makes it such as like a sudden surprise, like he's, what the Kunari aren't what I thought they were, and I gave it no thought nor looked at the codex entries? Wow, I am completely surprised. Like, my man, the Kunari were always douchebags, you know, the Kun was always a douche, you know, kind of thing.
Mage. You're tasked with escorting him out of the city. You do that, and a bunch of guys from his tribe will ambush you and demand that you release him. And the mage says that he is fine with being sentenced to death at this point. So I agreed and let them take him. And then they try to kill us anyway. Like, what the fuck? Oh, the same.
Yeah, that's how the Kunari work, right? Like, they are still within their society, right? You still did a crime, you know. And again, the tensions are rising within Act 2, and they're not gonna just let you go, right? There's again, this is such a fundamental misunderstanding of the Kun.
Same shit happens if you resist. You can fight them first, and then the mage will still kill himself. So Act 1 was...
Yeah, because the mage is deep in the sauce of the Kun. He believes it fundamentally, and he knows he's dangerous, right? So if he is not going to be killed, he's going to kill himself. Because that's how it works, you know, in the Kun. Like, again, this guy makes it such like a surprising thing that like the Kun is like this, you know. It's like, oh no, the Kun is something I didn't think it was. Oh gosh darn it, you know. I hate BioWare for making me make myself fool myself. It's like, my man.
Was a good start with the choices. Act 2 is starting to slip. And yeah, you do learn that there are a cult of people that are trying to paint the Kunari in a
And what choices, dude? Like, okay, and this is where we're gonna get into sort of the when should player choices end, right? So there's a concept in like a lot of RPGs where the amount of choices the player should have is kind of weird because like to a character, right? What choices can the player have that can affect that character, right? And so for the Mage Kunari, should the player be able or allowed to, basically say, hey Kunari, do not kill yourself, right? Because that takes away the agency of the Kunari. It takes away the agency of that character, right? And it gives the player more agency. Where's the line? Where's the sort of like sweet spot of the player has a lot of agency, but the NPCs still retain their agency, right? And this guy is like making it out to be that, yeah, I mean the player should just have like all the agency in the world, and the NPCs are basically vessels for their will, which is like, I'm not sure if what he's implying, but like I'm not sure what else to think,
worse light because they don't like them or whatever. But with how these fuckers act, it's not hard to make them look bad. And then in the climax,
Yeah, because that's the Kunari, right? Like, my man, again, you make it so surprising, like, oh man, dude, I didn't know the Kunari were like this, even though I literally gave it no thought.
of this act, you find out that the artifact that was stolen from them was actually taken by Isabella, one of your companions. And the Air Shark just unleashes a fucking murder spree on the city and kills a Viscount. Now I get it, someone stole your shit and you want it back. But does that make all of this okay? And on top of it, he also talks shit on humans and other species for being oppressive assholes and judging them too harshly. Like, fucking...
Yeah, dude, that's true. Like, again, this is like not understanding the Kun. The Kun has you accept like your role in society, right? Like you are you are suited for this role, and that's fine. And I'm not saying that's good or whatever. But what it does do is like it frames the sort of acceptance of your position as a good thing, right? It is good, and additionally, none of the Kunari, like no one in Kunari society like starves, Like that's the sort of like big point, and why a lot of like elves, especially elves, convert to Kunari society, because none of them really starve. They're not treated differently. Hey, if you're like a manual labor, you'll be treated as manual labor, but you won't be treated like poorly. No one's gonna fucking punch you, kick you, or like rape you, or whatever. Because like, why would they? That's not part of the Kun. No one says that. And like that's why so many people participate in the Kun. And he's not wrong, the Arashok, right? And he's gonna say like, but like then he murders people, and it's just like, whoa, hypocrite much? Like, my man, again, lacking of understanding of like the Kunari in general, And also, I just want to go back because there's a point
one of your companions. And the Air Shark just unleashes a fucking murder spree on the city and kills a Viscount. Now I get it, someone stole your shit and you want it back. But does that make all of this
yeah. So here's the thing that I have an issue with that. He really underplays what the Kunari are like after, right? He makes it seem like, oh, your little book, okay, your story time, is it gone? Is it disappeared, It's like, it's not just a book. It's not just some random thing, okay, that he lost, okay, and he wants back, It's literally the founding book for the entirety of the religion of the Kunari, the Kun, by the guy who made the Kun itself, and he wants it back. Like, my man, that like the sort of analog to our real world is like if someone like stole the U.S. Constitution, Like, yeah, I mean, they have the U.S. Constitution downloadable PDF on the USA's like website, Like they have that, right? But like stealing the physical document still means a lot, And in this instance, when we're in a fantasy world, it means like a lot more because it's like a fantasy world, and also because like the Kunari are much more like religious zealots, right? According to what they are, right? And like, my man, that's like why, you make it seem like this is like unexpected, doesn't make sense, it's dumb, it's like it has no logic whatsoever, but it has all the logic in the world. You just don't like the story, my guy. You fooled yourself into thinking that the Kunari were something else when they never were that. And this is like bad criticism because you can see where it leads him to do. He assumes Dragon Age 2 is like a lot more poorly written than it actually is, right? And that's just like being a bit dishonest.
So the climax of this act is the Kunari are pissy about Isabella taking their shit. So they attack Kirkwall and fuck everything up. Isabella takes the artifact and bails, so it seems like the only option we have is to fight these fuckers. It is here that we are introduced to the Captain of the Templars and the Grand Enchantment.
And let me check here. Go to the next timestamp, Reno. And then where is it? Oh yeah. He talks about like some of the companions.
Help her get laid. Meryl, whose entire purpose is to be the cute, quirky elf girl for the people who want to fuck a girl elf in Origins. Fenris, who kills himself with Shadow the Hedgehog. Isabella, where a Bioware employee went out to riot and said, hey, can I copy your character? Fine, just make sure you change it up. And so they made their own misfortune without the cool back.
Okay, and so this is the really dumb thing, which really does show that he has like no idea on Dragon Age, like two's companions whatsoever. So one, and he also says in the video that like, oh yeah, whatever, like they were in Origins first, I don't care. Like that does matter, because Isabella is like not misfortune, right? The misfortune that this guy is like talking about did not really exist at the time of Dragon Age 2's release. At the time, misfortune was a fucking bimbo. Like let's see.
Backstory and drip that Misfortune has. Seriously,
See all of that, right? That new animation he just showed.
or a Bioware employee went up to Riot and said, "Hey, can I copy your character? Fine, just make sure you change it up." And so they made their own Misfortune without the cool backstory and drip that
Like that. That wasn't there in 2010 when Dragon Age 2 released, I think. Yeah, no. 2011. But that wasn't there. That happened afterwards. That happened like recently, I think, like 2020 something, or maybe before then. Like, my man, Misfortune was for a large amount of her like first appearance was just a fucking bimbo pirate, and whatever, right? Nothing wrong with that. But like, they're not Misfortune, and like even in the current iteration, they're still not like each other, right? Like Misfortune's like identity is different from Isabella's identity. Isabella is fundamentally a character who became a pirate to free herself from like the bondage of an arranged marriage, right? And that literally she through like the reason why she's in Kirkwall, right, is because she risked her ship and her crew to save slaves, and it's just like this guy then betrays her as like a Misfortune ripoff, which is like so fucking dumb. And like I don't think this guy like fundamentally like engaged with the companions of Dragon Age 2, and like my man, I think that's a very big blight against your video, because like it means you didn't really analyze it correctly, and the identity crisis that you keep talking about isn't really there, because if you didn't really engage with them, how can you say there's an identity difference between the two when like you didn't engage in it, right?
Misfortune has. Seriously, they literally made a busty pirate with huge tits and said, "Oh, good enough." And yes, I know she was in Origins. That doesn't make her any more bland. There's also this guy whose name I don't remember. One of your siblings.
No, Sebastian.
Depending on which class you pick.
Very,
pick a marshal,
very
your mage
Scottish.
sister survives. Pick the mage, your warrior brother lives. And then there's Anders.
He hates Anders. He screams here because he blows up, and then I'm gonna go to the part when he specifically talks about Anders.
This is a very good way to go about it. If anything, this is gonna make the Templars believe their accusations more, and the mages even more fearful for their lives. It also makes Anders a huge fucking hypocrite, because
Now here's the thing, right? In games and in media in general, when there's a character who believes in something but then is like hypocritical, is that bad writing? I don't think so. It's contextual, right? If it's like intentional, then it's good writing. If it's not, it's bad writing. And what's happening here is intentional writing. Anders doing the things he does, like, because before is he complained about Meryl saying like, "Hey, you're using blood magic and that's dangerous," right? Like, okay, cool, but like that makes sense because that's just Anders' character, Like, again, this to me just feels like he fails to misunderstand the companions like fundamentally, because he assumes this is like a bad writing thing instead of just like him not liking who Anders is. It's fine if you don't like a character, like he doesn't like Oghren, right? But like Oghren is not a badly written character. He's just a character you don't like. Same with Anders. He's just a character you don't like, and that's fine, There's nothing wrong with it. Anyways, next parts is just mostly more plot synopsis than that. Now next to the next time step. Oh boy. Talks about Bioware, how Bioware is like going on the decline, and that kind of stuff. Okay.
more race to choose from. So we're off to a good start. This is what you see on the title screen. So they're taking into account the previous game's plot, and the escalation of this conflict throughout the series will now be the main focus of this game. Or at least, that's what I thought. But then suddenly, an explosion happens, and this is where your character comes in. Somehow, your character was in the center of this massive explosion, and ended up killing a bunch of mages and Templars. And to make matters worse, there's now a giant Nurgle cloud leaking demons in. The guards come in and find the only person still breathing, and throw you into a dungeon. Off to a great start. So then Mommy Cassandra comes in with Leliana, and they ask you why the
Yeah, so I needed to establish that quickly because, well, it's obviously his sort of thing of like, oh yeah, they're trying to have like a connected saga, right? Which, like, again, somewhat true, but like, again, I don't think is necessarily true because they use these points to build off. Now, does that mean that the issues with Dragon Age Inquisition regarding the mages and Templars are like not issues at all? No, there are issues, right? It does suck that not a lot of time was like given to develop them, especially because like Inquisition's open world kind of has an issue with making the stories a lot more, how do you say, muddled and whatnot, which makes it feel less impactful. Next Pointerino. He talks about open worlds and how they're necessarily a bit of a poor thing, and then how a lot of like open worlds have been like very poorly, and especially like Elden Ring is also a poor open world, or like a game that is like hampered by its open world, which like I can agree to disagree, or like I can agree to some extent. I mean, and then he's gonna talk about like Inquisition's open world.
But the more you look into this game, the more you start to see the cracks. To start off, the art design is lacking.
Oh yeah, sorry. So to go back to the previous point with the open world bit, because I'm not gonna go back to it because it's a lot. His basic gist is that like the open world is like poorly implemented and whatnot, which I can agree with to some extent. So yeah, but like the thing is, the issue with Dragon Age Inquisition itself is more its open world affecting all the other parts of it negatively, right? Not really that Dragon Age Inquisition lacks any good stories or characters and whatnot, but we'll get to that when we get there.
The armor, interior, monsters, so many designs in this game look like
So, hold on. Oh my gosh, dude. I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to play this like slow just so you can hear it, because like this is like such a dumb
actually
claim.
see colors is magical for this series, as it finally feels shit. The more you start to see the cracks. To start off, the art design is lacking. The armor...
Oh, and also, one thing I want to mention as well, because I didn't mention before, is that he says he likes Dragon Age 2's art style a lot, which I think is an interesting point.
Interior...
Now, here's the thing, like, the armor, interior, and, like, designs is bad, and, like, monster
The more you
design is
start
bad.
to see the
Like,
cracks.
this is, like, wild.
To start off, the art design is lacking. The art...
Lacking. Like, look at this, dude. Like, how is this lacking? You know, how is this, like, a bad art style or bad armor design?
Armor, interior...
How is this a bad interior? You know, this looks amazing.
Monster...
And monster design. He could have chosen any monster in Inquisition, all of Inquisition, yet he chose one of the most coolest looking fantasy creatures in all of existence, Corypheus. Do you not see him? Do you not have eyes which you can gaze upon this guy? Like, look at him. Look at this, like, metal lyrium shards embedded into his fucking flesh. Look at these sort of scars that he has. The sort of weird, like, you can't really tell if what's infused into him and what's not infused to him. Like, this is like peak, not only fantasy, like, not peak monster art, but also peak fantasy art as well. Like, this is like amazing, dude. Yet this guy says like it's terrible. I don't know, man. Like, you can say it's not your thing, but like, I don't know how this is like bad. Like, what makes this bad?
So many designs in this game look like shit. The armor design looks
And
like...
again, what is wrong with this armor design? Heavy Orlesian armor. It is like so good because it tells not only on how Orlesians like prefer their armor to look, it's ornamental. You can see the sort of line pauldrons just like protruding here, and you can again like line belt buckle as well, and just the sort of like nature of it, the golden blue. It not only looks cool as just like as a fantasy armor, but like tells so much as as a design for the world, because Orlesians are like this. They're ornamental. In the Stolen Throne, the false king Megrin, who's like taken over for Orlais taken over for Eldin for the Orlesian Empire, is said to, when he puts his armor on, it's very ornamental. It has a lot of like line motifs and aesthetics, and like it's just a very ornamental armor, right? And that is the aesthetics of Orlais, because that's the kind of country Orlais is. And yet this guy says bad armor design. It's like, I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Like shit. They look like they were just procedurally generated.
And again, this is like words you're saying, dude. Like, procedurally generated? Do you know what words mean? Like, these are not procedurally generated armor pieces. These are like beautifully crafted armor. And like, I don't get this criticism, you know? It just feels like complaining to complain.
They have no personality or creativity to it. The good ones are recreations from previous games, like Hawk and Cassandra's look. But then look at the armored jacket.
What is wrong with this?
It looks like a coat that was spray painted silver. A lot of the DLC are...
Okay, it looks like a coat spray painted silver. Is this not more like a a more lighter version of a coat where you are literally in the winter. Like, coats exist, stuff like that exists for like armor designs and stuff. And that's like fine, you know? Like, it looks amazing. I don't know what this guy's problem with it, you know? It just feels like he's complaining to
Oh,
complain,
that was
you know?
spray painted silver. A lot of the DLC armor that you get at the beginning of the game, all the proportions just look odd and it doesn't.
This is an issue Dragon Age has always had. Try putting dwarven armor on Sten. It looks atrocious, dude. That's why the Blood Dragon armor for Dragon Age Origins just looks absolutely terrible. Because, like, it's dwarven armor, and when you put it on Sten, it's dwarven armor, like, stretched up to fit Sten. You know? Like, look at any, like, armor in... Like, Dragon Age 2 is less of an issue because, like, all the armor is just designed for Hawk, so it's less of an issue. But, like, for Dragon Age Origins, it is an issue. You can see the armor that's made for humans doesn't make sense for, you know, doesn't make sense for dwarves, right? And the armor that's made for dwarves doesn't make sense for humans, right? That's just the thing. And this is like a Kunari set that you're wearing. And, like, yeah, of course it's gonna look a bit bad. You're putting a human on it. Now you can say, like, well, shouldn't they adjust it for those proportions? Yeah, sure. But, like, that's an issue with, like, that armor specifically. For the other armor, all the proportions make sense, you know?
Fit the previous
Like, I have eyes. I'm not blind. This looks fine.
aesthetic of the games prior. Just compare these two armor sets and
And he is such a telling piece, okay? You could not, like, compare the Inquisitor's armor to the Champion of Kirkwall armor. Like, he really just couldn't do that. He had to, like, make it seem so irrevocably bad. This is, like, normal armor you have in Inquisition. Just, like, normal armor. This is, like, Champion of Kirkwall. The armor that's, like, on the box art cover stuff. Like, why does this guy do this? It's such a, like, a bad point.
tell me which one you prefer. They also got lazy with the NPCs. Now, I know I complained before about the same Alistair haircut in Origins, but I'd rather have that than all of them wearing this. What the
And again, this is such dumb, like, criticism. Like, my man, you do realize this is just, like, gear you have for scouts in the cold. And, like, it's also, like, camouflage shit, dude. Like, what do you think scouts wear, okay? Do you think they wear, like, neon fucking shit? No. They wear stuff appropriate to their job, right? And they conceal themselves as well. You know? Do you really think you should have, like, no helmet whatsoever? It looks fine. Does it look a bit goofy? I mean, sure, but, like, it looks fine.
fuck is this even supposed to be? Is there a sale going on for green ragged hoodies? I'm not asking for much here, just a little bit of diversity when it comes to the NPCs to make the world feel a little bit more believable. But
And again, he says that when he shows heavy Orlesian armor, the Orlesian aesthetic was, like, codified in Dragon Age. Most we got in Dragon Age Origins and 2 were, like, silver and gold armor, right? But not, like, any ornamental stuff. We get a lot of diversity in armor types. We get a lot of diversity in environment. We get a lot of diversity in enemy types. This guy, like, his criticism on all this kind of stuff just, like, makes no sense whatsoever.
moving on, the game is divided into several different sections that act out as wide open worlds to explore, each one having different materials to collect, quests to achieve, and enemies to fight. If you have played any Assassin's Creed game, this will look very familiar, because a lot of what you're doing in this game is repeating markers on the map that appear in the different regions. Whether it's setting up camps, completing side...
Now, there is something to agree with this, right? But, like, a lot of his disagreements, I think, are more due to presentation styles. Or at least what it should be is presentation styles and, like, the open worlds not necessarily aligning with the story trying to be told, right? The best open world area for Dragon Age Inquisition is Empress Sudden, right? Where the Red Templars are like, basically kidnapping people, ingesting them with lyrium, and to turn them into, like, red lyrium nodes, right? Literally transforming them, crystallizing their body to be harvested for more red lyrium, right? And that is such an amazing area because, well, you're working your way up. It's basically like a straight line up. It's just a big straight line with a lot of branches all over the place. But, like, what's so interesting about it is that you're like combating against the Templars by setting up camps all along the way until you reach the final camp, the final base for the Templars they keep, and then you take over it. It's interesting. It's very, like, compelling, and especially on like the story that it's telling on how the Red Templars are even getting all these like red lyrium nodes they're getting from, is because they're forcing people to ingest it to become red lyrium nodes and harvesting it. It's interesting. You can also see like experiments the Red Templars have been doing, and you can even see like demons getting involved as well. It's an interesting like open world area, right? But that's because it focuses on that, And I can agree with him on that sort of criticism, but like I feel like he's not aligning it very specifically. It seems more like he just doesn't like open worlds, which is fine, but I feel like there's a lot more you can say than just that. On to the next point. Hold on. He says music's pretty good here, I think.
Over and over again, just so you can get a high enough level.
Well, that he says here like music's pretty good.
I don't know if this was a glitch or something, but every time a song would start while running around the open world, it would stop. And I would just have to...
Yeah, some glitches, which I agree with.
And of other RPGs and had the same song going over and over again whenever you got into combat, but at least you had something to listen to. It also doesn't help that the banter rarely plays in this game. One of the best parts about the other games was listening to the characters interact and talk to each other. It really sold the companions as actual people in the game. Now, when it does happen, it is nice, but it feels so rare. Like, characters only talk to each other every once in a while. And hell, I'm not alone in feeling that way. Look, there's literally a mod that increases the party banter. And I gotta ask, what the fuck happened? Was the Frostbite engine so alienating that they couldn't figure out how to make these sequences work or some shit? I don't get it. Also, the mounts are shit, which honestly...
No, I can agree with that, obviously, because, like, it doesn't really play that a lot. But, like, I feel like there's not much to say other than, like, yeah, it sucks, but, like, the banter is pretty good. I don't know, dude. It's a weird complaint, I guess, the way he frames it. Next point.
The world and atmosphere is not great, but it's only the beginning. The combat took a hell of a blow as well.
Now, I'm not going to focus too much on the combat section because, frankly, I don't particularly care. I think it's fine. Some button mashy stuff, but, like, I think it's overall fine. He talks about the world maps, war maps. I can agree with some of the criticisms he lays down here.
In an area that player wants to explore, because at the very least that incentivizes them to level up so that they can defeat that enemy and defeat this obstacle. It's another thing to tell them to grind out just to get some arbitrary game point so that they can just clear the way and venture forward.
And also, I think it's overstating the fact that, like, you need power for a lot of it. Like, no, you don't really need to do that. Like, you can get power very easy in Inquisition. It's not that hard. Like, if you just want to mainline the main quest, it's not that much, Speedrunners are not complaining. They're like, man, I have to, so much power I have to gain. No, the power isn't that much. Now, you can say it's weird that you do that, but, like, again, it's just, like, a easy way to say, like, you need influence to get into these high, social circles or something like that, which is fine.
It just feels so artificial. And speaking of which, let's talk about what's probably my least favorite aspect of this game, the power system. So, unlike the previous games, you can't just go right into the main story right out of the game. For a majority of them, you're required to have a certain amount of power. How do you get power, you may ask? Mainly from doing the open world shit, doing rifts, side quests, collecting material to craft, and so on and so forth. The thing is, the required amount of power is constantly increasing every time you progress the story, so the further you go, the more you have to grind. Some of these missions will give you very little power, and so many of them give no gratification whatsoever. They're literally just fetch quests or kill these things quests, and they repeat over and over again.
Now again, I can agree with that part, like, yeah, sure does suck on that one. Like, I don't know, I feel like he is, like, overstating the issue, I guess.
Until you get the right amount of power, and then you can move on to the main quest that actually have a little bit of enjoyment in them. Remember Origins, how almost all the side quests in that game related to the main quest? This was a great method because the players were...
Dragon Age Inquisition does have that. Not as much, I think, but that's necessarily due to the nature of an open world. Open world games just have to have a lot of stuff. They aren't necessarily related to the main quest, but it does have that. You have a lot of side quests that are related to, for example, in the Hinterlands, just related to the Templar Mage conflict that is happening in the area. You just have that. Same with the other open areas as well. There's some relations to the main quest, whether it be Venatori or Red Templar, or just like some Corypheus stuff. Like, there is there.
Were able to complete side content without taking the focus off the main objective. And I think that is wonderful. Seeing the design for this game makes me incredibly confused as to why BioWare lost so much faith in their own game design. But we'll get to that later.
And if he researched this part, he would have then been able to sort of like understand that, like, the reason this is because Skyrim, right? Now, you can still blame, BioWare for choosing to do, open world stuff and not necessarily Bethesda. But again, that's why. At the time, a lot of people wanted open world games. This was just a thing gamers wanted, okay? You can blame BioWare as well, but, like, you can't put all the blame on them because, again, they wanted it. Gamers wanted this. They wanted open world games. And if it wasn't an open world game, you kind of saw it wasn't really as successful or as talked about, And that's just the sort of like reality of the situation for fantasy RPGs at the time, And like, yeah, it sucks.
Right now, we should move on.
Okay. He talks about the story, plot synopsis and stuff.
People have said it before, and I'll say it again. The Inquisition doesn't feel much like an Inquisition. At least, not what the history would have us believe. In this game, the Inquisition is just a league of good guys that work as a base of operations for our protagonists and their posse. It's very clear that they...
Which is weird. Why does it have to follow the strict real-world definition of what the Inquisition was? Like, I don't know, man. Like, I think it's fine, Like, I don't know, man. I feel like this is kind of missing the point of, like, the Inquisition within Dragon Age was this, like, order, again, of religion, of the Chantry religion, right? That went and solved, like, issues outside the Chantry's control. Which is, like, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It has some issues as well, but, like, for the most part, it's just that. A religious organization, which is, like, fit into the themes with Dragon Age Inquisition, which is, like, about religion.
Wanted to make a new faction without forcing the player to pick sides between the other factions, which is fair enough. It's not like this has to be a Fire Emblem game or anything like that. But to get into the story, after the opening and the grinding in the hinterlands, you set out to find Templars, or the mages, depending on what you choose. And the Templars are having their own issues with demons and are being possessed, which is really ironic. At this point, you don't know why, but after stopping the threat and meeting a magic lad that definitely isn't a demon, you now have the choice to recruit the Templars or the mages on your side. Now you're probably wondering, what about the whole plot between the mages and Templars? And yeah, I was wondering that too. Then I realized that they just completely threw that storyline in the fucking trash. Remember the growing tensions that Templars and...
Like, it's again overstated, right? They didn't completely throw it in the trash. It became less relevant as the game went on, but it was like a big part of the first part of the game. Like, again, I think this is like overstating the issue.
Mages have, even in the first game. Remember how Anders did a whole terrorist act to send a message to both the Templars and the mages? Remember all the war crimes that the two leaders of each faction did in the previous game just to get back at each other? Because this game doesn't. Because other than the...
And that's a weird thing to say, because, like, why should they be referencing what Orsino and Meredith did, right? Why they should be referencing what Anders did? And they do talk about Anders. They do talk about Orsino and Meredith. They do that. But why is it relevant now, right? What happened is now is a war between mages and Templars, right? That's what's happening now. They should focus on that. Like, sure, the history is important and whatnot, but it's not relevant to what's happening, Like, and that's, like, how conflicts work. When conflicts started, it doesn't really matter if how the conflict started. What matters is how to end the conflict,
A few enemies you fight, a couple open world exchanges, and some party banter. They barely fucking address it. Never mind the fact that this was a whole storyline that was set up in the main driving force in Dragon Age 2. Nope, we gotta get back to the Demon Portal Leak. So after we recruit some people into the Inquisition, we go back to Haven and see if we have enough money
again, oversetting the issue
to seal up this crack. And it turns out we do. Thanks, Billy Mays. Rest in peace. So we go back and celebrate, but not for long because then a bunch of assholes come by and attack us and storm the base. And this is where we meet the main villain of the game, Corypheus. And he looks fucking awful. The Demon Portal.
I don't know why this
after we recruit some people into the Inquisition, we go back to Haven and see if we have enough mighty putty to seal up this crack. And it turns out we do. Thanks, Billy Mays. Rest in peace. So we go back and celebrate, but not for long because then a bunch of assholes come by and attack us and storm the base. And this is where we meet the main villain of the game,
Corypheus. This guy, peak monster design. You can see the red lyrium nodes going out. You can see all of this like coming out. The combination of flesh, this elongated limbs, this like sort of Darkspawn aesthetics as well. Like, my man, this is like amazing, dude. I have eyes, I can see it. And here's another thing I want to point out. Throughout all the times you've mentioned Corypheus, he's not mentioned once. Corypheus was seen in Legacy, in Dragon Age 2 Legacy. He's not mentioned it once. What this tells me is either A, he didn't find it important enough to talk about it, B, didn't play it. Like, I'm not sure which answer it is, but both are bad. Because you still have to mention it, because, like, it was setting up Corypheus for the next game. So, like, how is Dragon Age, Inquisition, not following through from what the previous game set up, when you clearly have, Corypheus, who is being explored in the next game? Like, I don't know, man. I think that's an important factor to consider, but he doesn't do that, Which I think, like, makes for a poor video.
Corypheus. And he looks fucking awful. His design looks like shit. He looks like a joke character someone would make in Street Fighter 6. But he explains why the protagonists had their new power.
I have no idea how you can say this, dude. This is, like, wild.
Or to seal the breaches, which I actually think is really interesting. Basically, this power was never meant to be something that could seal the breaches, and it was never meant to be given to the main character. It was a power that Corypheus was going to use when they were torturing the Divine. But your character showed up at just the right moment, and the Divine gave them the power, as one last fuck you to Corypheus. And I like this.
That's a weird thing to say. No, the Divine did not give the Inquisitor the power. What happened was like a kerfuffle happened, right? And Corypheus dropped the orb, and then the Inquisitor grabbed it, and then like it gave him the power. I don't know, man. The Divine didn't do that.
It loops back to the whole idea that this can be anyone's story, regardless of what race and gender they chose at the beginning. It gives a good Spider-Man vibe to it. Speaking of superheroes, that is the overall vibe that this game.
Man, dude, I don't know, man. It just feels like so many of these terms that are being used is just like, so these are the terms used for like when things are bad, right? So I'm using these terms because the thing that is happening is bad, and I want to indicate to the audience that these things are bad. It's like, what? Huh? How is Dragon Age Inquisition superhero? He's gonna try to explain, but like,
Is going for.
very
And you can
bad.
really see it in the scene. This is the scene where the big bad reveals himself to the character and the audience and explains their plans and taunts everyone around him. Now, while I do like the concept
Yeah, that's how Crucius works. Like, you can say you don't like bad guys who do that, but like, I don't know, man. I think Dragon Age has always been about characters who talk like their character, who come from their perspective of character, and Crucius is that kind of guy. You know, I've seen the Golden Throne and it was empty. Like, that's the kind of guy, you know. He's an egomaniac. Like, what's wrong with having an egomaniac in Dragon Age? Like, I don't know, man.
of the power being a mistake and the game reinstating the idea of the main character being a self-insert. Corypheus makes this shit really messy, and I can't help but feel like the game didn't need him to push the narrative. The whole idea of the land of Theodas being divided and forming a single flag to recruit allies and rally the people behind is already gripping enough. For Christ's sake, the previous game set up a conflict that divided the world.
Now, you can say that is a legitimate criticism that Dragon Age Inquisition doesn't like carry over the Mage Templar conflict, right? And I do agree that like it should have done more with it than what it did, you know, with the rest of the game, right? But again, I don't know, man. I think it's fine, you know. I don't know, man. And he's gonna like make this a sort of like, it tries to be a saga, but then it fails to be a saga. It's like, no, man. That's just like Dragon Age closing off a plot point and then like starting a new plot point, you know. I don't know, man.
We don't need this big bad to fight against. He just feels so unnecessary. So after this, Haven, the main hub at this point, gets sieged, and the entire Inquisition is forced to retreat. And this is a clear low point in the story. At least that's what I was going to say, but then everyone starts to sing to lift the spirits up and not give up. And it's clear that this game really is setting the tone for the Hollywood method of story.
Hollywood method of storytelling. I like the Hollywood method of storytelling when Liliana started to sing at the most random time. You know, you talk to her for a bit, and it was like something about religion, and it's just like, oh yeah, let me bust a song now. I'm like, oh, this is weird. Okay. Like, I don't know, man. This is like not unexpected. And like, and again, this is being used as an insult, right? The Hollywood method of storytelling, which is like meant to be an insult. It's like, one, who fucking cares if it's Hollywood or not? Who cares? Was it a good scene and appropriate for the moment? And it was. Like, the song that they sing here, you know, like, The Dawn Will Come, is an amazing song. It makes so much sense for what's happening. And also, it's a religious like organization, and religion has a lot of singing parts into it, and having that like sort of aspect like lift all these people up and have this like triumphant moment makes so much sense, you know. It's a low point of this story, but the dawn will come. Just look to the sky, and that's just like cool, you know. It's amazing, right? Who fucking cares if it's like Hollywood as shit? No one fucking cares. What matters is if it's good or not, you know? And you can say, but Dragon Age Origins wasn't like that. What? Like, Dragon Age Origins has a lot of these moments like Liliana singing and stuff, and it may not have a specific scene like this one, but it has moments where it's just like cool and even Hollywood at a moment. Like, do you not remember at the final battle for Denerim, where you have Alistair, who is calling to the troops and saying like, this Grey Warden stood by me from time and time again, and then like ends off in like rattles on his speech. It's like cool and epic, and then ends off the speech like for Ferelden, for the Grey Wardens, and then fucking charges like with the troops all the way there. It's amazing, dude. And dude, that is Hollywood. That is like typical Hollywood fantasy stuff. Like fucking Lord of the Rings did this shit, you know? Like the Riders of Rohan charging into battle with that. Like, that is just Hollywood shit, you know? Does that mean Dragon Age Origins is now defuncto, terrible, trash fucking garbage? No. What it means is just like, it was an appropriate use of those tropes. What Dragon Age Inquisition is doing here is an appropriate use of those tropes. It's just like, man.
Storytelling, because we just had the main villain ravage an entire base of operations for the Inquisition and probably murder a bunch of people in it. And everyone's just singing and having a good time. Don't worry.
Yeah, man. Because that's how shit works, you know? You move on. You try to move the best you can. Sometimes sulking is necessary, but sometimes you gotta get out of the fucking depression and move and get on with it, you know? Depression is a spiral downwards into despair. The only way you can do that is by pushing through. And that's what's happening. Like, this song is meant to do that. Like, man, dude, it's so bad, dude. I don't know why he's making this criticism, my guy. Like, yeah, did you want like more of an extended, like, sort of like an extended gameplay section where you just have Depression Simulator 2014 or something like that? I guess. But like, I think it already established that effectively with you, like, for like minutes on end walking into the snow with no one around and you just collapsing a bunch throughout the entirety of it. Like, I think that was effective enough to have the low point. And now, rise point, we're not giving up, the dawn will come, just look to the sky. It's like, gosh, dude, that's cool. That's cool.
Hey guys, we'll get through this. Remember in Origins, when a Darkspawn killed Dunk?
Okay, yeah, man, like, that does suck, dude, but like, you're missing the context of what like Inquisition is. Inquisition isn't just like a bunch of fucking gays like going around and like being sad and gay all the time, okay? No, it's like Inquisition is an organization of gays, okay? And they're all gonna go have a good time. And you know what sometimes happens in religious organizations as well? Sometimes hymns happen, sometimes songs happen. And that's what happens. And not only that, this is missing the context that Andraste was a singer. Andraste, throughout the entirety of Dragon Age, we've learned from time and time again, Andraste had a beautiful singing voice. Her singing brought the Maker's attention to the world once again. And her singing led the armies into battle. Like, this is just step in step, line in line, with what Dragon Age has always been about. Like, I don't know, man. I think this is a fairly good representation of it. This is just like, I don't know. I'm spending too much time on this.
Duncan, King Kaelin, and the other Grey Wardens, and you and Alistair barely make it out alive. Remember how that is treated as a low moment for the characters? Well, the reason why is that Origins treats the setting as a dark fantasy, whereas in Inquisition,
oh my man,
the setting is presented as more of a high fantasy. At least, that's how I see it.
No, man. Like, it's not treated as, like, okay. So, personally, I do not think, like, Dragon Age Origins or Dragon Age is a dark fantasy setting, personally, right? Like, dark fantasy to me is, like, fairly oppressive throughout the entirety of the thing, right? And I don't think Dragon Age Origins is oppressive throughout the entirety of its game. There are a lot of, like, good moments where you just, like, are doing fantasy shit, right? And you're just, like, being happy and just, like, having a good time, right? I think that what kind of fantasy Dragon Age is a fantasy that's, like, taking the ideas and concepts of a fantasy universe and taking them seriously, right? What if magic was real, right? And oh shit, it seems like magic being real would have a lot of consequences for magic users and non-magic users. Because if you can just, like, mind control someone, right, then, like, clearly that's going to have, like, an effect wide scale, which causes the Tevinter Imperium, right? And when you have, like, magic, the way the magic exists in Dragon Age, it's going to have a lot of effects as well. And that's the kind of fantasy I think. And, like, Dragon Age Inquisition is not less Dragon Age. It's not less fantasy. It's not the less type of fantasy that Dragon Age Origins is. It's the same kind of fantasy. And if you want dark moments, it has dark moments. I mentioned in Empress Saloon, you have just, like, these crystallized, these people who've been crystallized because they were kidnapped, forced ingested red lyrium to turn in red lyrium nodes, which is an agonizing process, which we can see within the literal dark timeline within the mage section, because you travel in time, I know. And you can also see, like, a lot of dark moments within the Templar section. Like, you can see so many dark moments in this game. You can see notes about, like, people getting raped and shit. Like, this again, this is, like, not only failing to, like, establish a strong identity, but also, like, he fails to understand that, like, Dragon Age has always been, like, a different kind of fantasy game than he's been thinking it is.
The tone and concept of previous games feels like they were thrown away, which is a problem because it alienates the series away from its roots. So after this little song and dance, you find a new base called Skyhold, and from then on, it becomes your new base of operations. And I fucking hate this place. I understand what they're going for. They wanted to make a customizable base of operations, but they didn't have to make this shit so fucking annoying to navigate. One of the
I don't know, man, it's fine.
main aspects of this game is talking to your companions, and it doesn't help that getting to them is such a chore. I prefer Haven to this place. It was at least straightforward and easy to navigate. It's also at this point that Varric introduces us to Hawk, which I have very mixed feelings about that. On one hand, it's cool to see the previous protagonists come back, and I can talk to them about stuff that happened before. But on the other hand, this feels like it's purely for fan service. And honestly, that's what I feel.
I guess, I don't know, it's fine. Like, would have the game been better if Hawk wasn't there, I guess? You know? I don't know.
For a lot of the returning characters. But anyway, Hawk gives us some advice on how to stop Corypheus, and that they have a Grey Warden contact that they are working with. So you go and meet them, and you meet some guy named Shroud. At least that's who I met. So this is where you can meet another returning character from the previous games. If Alistair remained a Grey Warden, it'll be him. If you turn Logain to a Grey Warden, it'll be him. If none of them are still Grey Wardens, then it's Stroud. But regardless of who it is, they will tell you that the Grey Wardens are sick and are doing bad things. So after a little bit of grinding, you do a siege battle on the Warden Stronghold, which is actually pretty cool. It really makes me want to play Shadow of War. But you fight off a bunch of demons, and then you see that one of the main Grey Warden dickheads has been corrupted by Corypheus. But thankfully, my character can tell the other Wardens to wake the fuck up, samurai, and they all revolt against him. But then suddenly my party, Hawk and Shroud, are dragged into the Fade. So the main thing to take note of story-wise is that this gives a little bit more of a clear picture on what happened between the protagonist and Corypheus, and it actually shows us a clear scene of them receiving the power, which feels kind of unnecessary. We were already told that they were given the power as a mistake.
Okay, and this is another weird misunderstanding of this, like,
I don't think they really need to see that again.
Of the game.
I mean, I guess it's mainly to give
Which
context.
is like, so a lot of the point of Dragon Age Inquisition is a lot of religion, right? And this religion sort of thing is like you're the Herald of Andraste, right? That's why you're in this religion organization, and people like, you know, so kind of worship you because, you know, Herald of Andraste, right? You were seen with a golden figure similar to a divine that was basically saved you, and now you're returned from the Fade. Who else could it be but Andraste, or the Maker's Will? Or, regardless, even if it was like the Divine herself, right, the Divine who died recently, it was still maybe Andraste and the Maker's Will. So because of that, right, we can sort of assume that you're a religious figure. And now, that point of seeing it is to see that, hey, it wasn't actually Andraste. It wasn't actually, you know, the Divine, or I mean, kind of the Divine, or the Maker. It was a spirit posing as the Divine. That puts a lot of holes into your claim to being the Herald of Andraste. How can you be called the Herald of Andraste if Andraste didn't actually send you to be her herald? You know? Like, again, this is like lacking understanding of what the story was about. And again, throughout this entire thing, he's never even mentioned once that you are the Herald of Andraste, right? Or maybe I skipped those parts, but like regardless, he also doesn't like make a big point of it. You can be like the sort of religious figure and accept it as your position, right? And how the sort of race that you chose affects it, right? If you're a human, everyone thinks it's fine. If you're a Kunari, whoa, that is completely different, you know?
Between the Divine and why she did what she did, but I don't know. It feels a little too much. But finally, we find an exit to the Fade, but a big monster is in the way, and you have to choose between Hawk and Shroud to stay behind and fight it off. I wonder who I'm going to save. The person I played as in the previous game and have more of a connection to, or some random schmuck I just met. And before you say it, yeah, I know it would have been a hard decision if it was Alistair, but this decision is still incredibly hollow, because it's not like whoever you pick becomes a new companion or joins you throughout the game or anything.
And this is weird to say, like, okay, like, what? Like, okay? Just because they don't, like, become a companion or a big character doesn't mean it's not, it's worse of a choice, you know? Like, we make a lot of choices throughout Origins with characters that don't become companions or not, or, like, don't reoccur. Like, okay, so, this is character, he's called Balin, he's called Haramon, right? We see them, and at the end of their quest lines, they die, right? If you side with either one of them, the opposite will die, right? For different reasons. And if you do have one of them who live like Haramon lives, right? You don't really see him throughout the rest of the game. Is that bad? Is that terrible? Now you can say like, well, if you revisit him as an origin character, it's different. No. We make a decision, and then one of them like dies eventually, right? And the other one remains. The one who remains, is that like bad? Is that terrible? No, it's not. Just because they don't like reoccur throughout the entire game doesn't mean the choice is less impactful or less meaningful. It just means the choice is just like gonna be for that moment, which is fine, you know?
Thing like that, they just fuck off out of the story. It really just comes down to which character you like better. But it's also at this point where you have the choice to have the Grey Wardens join the Inquisition, and because of my understanding of things, we need people on our side, so I have them join us. And then my companions complain to me about it.
And
okay, I get why some of you fuckers don't like this, but why does Cassandra have an issue with this?
Man, dude, it seems like he didn't talk to her or like understand her character at all. Like, you do realize Cassandra's issues with the Grey Wardens is that like they're an organization with a lot of power and not a lot of oversight, you know? Like that's why, you know? Like that's reasonable, right? The Wardens have a lot of power and they have a lot of little oversight, you know? Like and they're also a secretive organization. She also dislikes that as well, you know? Like, it's understandable. Again, seems like you just dislike what the characters are doing rather than it being bad writing.
Baby, I love you, but you wrote me into this Inquisitor shit. And now you want to tell me that I'm doing it wrong? But I also want to take a break from the story
Yeah, they can have disagreements with you, my guy.
And talk about the RPG mechanics, and where they really start to go downhill in this game. The choices in this game, compared to the last ones, feel so arbitrary and hollow to the point where they are ultimately meaningless, even more so than Dragon Age 2. The only real thing you have in terms of consequence is what your companions think of you. And this system has been clunky ever since
And he doesn't really give an example on that. The most I can think of is like, oh man, dude, like, Like, we can't have a different kind of army look, but you can, right? Kind of. It's weird, but like, this to me like seems like such a weird complaint as well, because it's like, okay, the RPG mechanics are going downhill, and it doesn't explain how or why. I can only assume, and my assumptions can be wrong, you know, because like what he's thinking could be entirely different, but he doesn't explain, you know.
Origins. The story and quest in Inquisition are basic to a fault, and I know some of you might say, well, Origins was a basic story too, and people liked it. And yes, you're right, but while Origins was standard in story, it made up for it with in-depth characters and RPG mechanics that gave you a variety and replayability. Inquisition, well, I wouldn't say there isn't replayability, as there are different ways to interact with the other characters, especially since this game takes account of the other game's choices. But the open world and combat make it such a chore to do. But besides that, I do think that this—
Now that's a fine criticism. The open world of Inquisition muddies the other mechanics and the other story bits and the other lore and all that kind of stuff. That I can agree with. But that's the only thing you can really focus on as a problem with Inquisition. I do not think that Inquisition has terrible choices, terrible RPG mechanics, or at least not RPG mechanics that aren't like different from the previous games, right? Or has like terrible lore or anything else that this guy has an issue with. The fundamental issue with Inquisition is its open world and how it negatively affects the other parts of the game.
This game does do a good job at incorporating the fates of characters in the previous games as well, as it is cool to see them again and talk to them about what I did before. But that's the problem. I'm ultimately not interested in what is new in this game, as all my interests are going into the people that I already know. I'm more invested in Morrigan and what she's doing with her son who has the soul of an old god, rather than fucking Sarah and her stupid red Jenny thieves. For all the effort that this game puts into trying to make me feel like I'm the one in charge, I'm not. I mean, yeah, they gave me the name Inquisitor, provided me my own private quarters, I have my own Iron Throne where I can decide the fate of prisoners, and everyone is singing my praises and talking about what a great guy I am. But I'm not doing it. These three are. As far as I'm aware.
My man, what do you think most leaders in history did? Do you really think that every single king was a true monarch and every single law passed through them? My man, that's not how it works. Most leaders in every part of history did not do most things by themselves. They had advisors, my guy. Like, this is such a dumb thing to complain about. Like, I don't feel like I'm the Inquisitor. What did you want? Did you really want to like do every single minute detail? That's not how it works, dude. And that's not how, and I know this for a fact, a lot of people would say like this is a bit unrealistic. There's this like, my character's like this mega ultra super great guy who can just like do all these things by himself and doesn't need anyone else. Like, he's eventually going to suggest like, why not like the Inquisitor do all these sort of things, or why not have the options be reflective of the advisors you have, military option, spy option, and diplomatic option, which is like a fine suggestion, but like it's still like you're addressing a problem that doesn't exist, right? Like, the game has you feel like the Inquisitor, and you can say like, oh, I can sit in judgment and judge people, and that's like whatever. Like, my man, that is still you doing like the Inquisitor's job. And not only that, you are doing a lot of like decision making when you make the Templars comply to you, or you allow them to join you side by side. Same with the mages, and for the Grey Wardens, you can just like literally dictate them leave. An organization that you have like no power over, and you can dictate whether they are in a country or not, right? Or they join you. Like, my man, that's like a lot of power, and that's you being the Inquisitor, you know? I don't know, man. This just feels like you not, I think, understanding it, or like understanding how leaders work.
These three are the ones that are doing all the important shit. Cullen is marching troops.
Yeah, and wait, hold on.
And conquering land. Liliana is sending spies and doing cool espionage.
I think he says this later on. I'm not sure which point. But later on he does say that as well, that it feels like there's no real like you. Wait, hold on. I think this next timestamp is the point. It is. Yes.
Looking for Kieran, and the two of you, and you can finally have the showdown with this ugly ketchup-stained motherfucker, and it's really fucking clunky. I mean, I didn't expect much with this combat in the gameplay. In this, it's just me and the schmucks that I happen to take with me. So go back in is cool, but it doesn't feel like the entirety of the Inquisition is all in on this fight. Something that I loved about the final battle in Origins is that—
Okay. My man, the Arbor Wilds, did you forget? Do you have a memory of a goldfish or something? You literally played a clip of it as this with Cullen leading troops. That was the Inquisition's forces fighting against Corypheus. There were two final battles. There were the Arbor Wire battle, where you fought against Corypheus' own forces, and then you fought against Corypheus himself. This is just like the Battle of Denerim, but extended into different phases. You have the army phase, and then you have the, you know, battle with the final antagonist, right? Like, my man, it's... I don't know, man. This is such a weird complaint to me.
Is that they made an effort to show everyone involved for the play, in both cutscenes and in the gameplay. In this, it's just me and the schmucks
Yeah, it's just... Yeah.
And sequels. Human or ghost. He acts so strange and is capable of reading people's thoughts. He's one of the more unique characters in the series, and it's a welcome addition. There's Blackwall, who's just kind of here. And then there's Iron Bull. Okay, I don't like Bull, but not for the reason that you think. I think Bull's character and personality is fine, but I don't like it because it doesn't feel like it fits with a Kunari. It feels like it would fit a lot better for a dwarf, because Bull...
And again, this I'm going to talk about because it's going to be relevant in the next section of this video, but like, he doesn't understand the Kunari. Because like, Iron Bull is a Kunari, and also his entire story is him being torn between a Kunari and like a Talvashoth, right? Like, that's the whole point of his story. Literally, the culmination of his quest line is him choosing between his friends at the Chargers and his, you know, life at the Cune. Literally, he has banter lines where he, like, or I think no dialogue lines, where he says, hey, he struggled with the Cune and he turned himself into the brainwashers. Literally, he turned himself in and he got himself brainwashed back into the Cune because he had doubts of it. Like, he's a Kunari, my guy. And this guy, like, I can't believe it. Like, this is such a fatal understanding of how the Kunari work as a society, you know? Like, I'm sorry that you thought they were something else. They were never what you thought they were. They were always something else. Like, I don't know, man. Weird. Next, timestamp. Oh yeah, yeah, he talks about it, he talks about transparency, he thinks it's neat and stuff. And now, you may be wondering, why are we talking about absolution? Why are we talking about absolution here? When, if this was a, you know, video about Dragon Age's identity crisis, right? If this was that kind of video, wouldn't it be pertinent to talk about all the Dragon Age media? Instead of just, like, picking the games? Instead of just, like, having the games and then, like, randomly the TV show? Like, wouldn't that be pertinent? Well, I'll explain to why. Like, see, look.
Absolution
this
is that
why
it doesn't
this guy
stand out compared to the other shows. It's not like Arcane, where
Only
art style
talks
animation
about
stands out, or Edge Runners, where the story is incredibly tear-jerking and rich with recognizable locations from the game. But this show also doesn't get much people interested in the series. Castlevania...
quickly talk about this one. Who cares? Like, my man, I don't think every video game adaptation needs to, like, get people into the series. I think what's fine is, like, if it's a good show or not. And Absolution is a good show. You can say, is it as good as, like, these other shows he was talking about? Maybe not, right? But, like, who cares? You know, why does every show, every video game adaptation need to be this, like, big thing that drives up millions of copies of sales? And no, it doesn't. What is important for any media to do is just be good. If it's successful, then it's successful. If it's not, that's not. Anyways, to the real reason why he just, like, mentioned Absolution, like, despite the fact that, like, it has no relevance to anything else.
got people to talk about the classic games, Arcane got people into the lore of League, and Edge Runners got Cyberpunk player numbers to an all-time high. Inquisition didn't go up when this shit got released. Also, I want to talk about Quindian.
It's the Kunari. He's mad because he's mad because he doesn't understand the Kunari, and he's like shouting at Bioware, why are the Kunari what I think they are? Why did I fool myself to think of the Kunari as something else entirely? Like, my man, like, this is literally it. He doesn't like Quinn because she's just a Talvashoth. Like, what do you think the Inquisitor Kunari was? They were a Talvashoth, dude, born outside the Kunari. Like, that's why she acts different. Do you really think there's some, like, racial essentialism happening here? Like, I don't know, my man. We saw, literally, other dwarves born outside the Dwarven society, and no one's giving them fucking shit. Like, Varys born out of Dwarven society, and no one's caring. Like, no one gives a shit. Why? Because, like, it makes sense, you know? These aren't, like, race essentialism characteristics. Like, listen what he says.
And more importantly, I want to talk about how the Kunari are treated in this series. I fucking hate how the Kunari were treated in this series. They did them so dirty.
And by Kunari, he means one. We want to see I can't pronounce things. We only see her, right? She's the only Kunari in the series, from what I remember. And, like, yeah, if this guy, like, was actually, like, talking about the identity crisis, he would have seen the comics and gone like, oh, never mind. Oh, never mind. Never mind. Because, like, the Kunari in the comics as well, like, act as, like, how the Q describes they should be acting, right? But, like, I don't know, man. This guy is very dumb. in the way he like does these kind of I don't know.
We go from having a really cool window into how the Kunari are with Sten. Then we go to a bunch of
One window. Remember that. One window.
murdering assholes in Dragon Age 2.
Which makes sense because that's who they are. Like, my man like didn't read the codex entry of Ravani, like in Dragon Age Origins, where they literally have conversion camps.
And now they're just a bunch of quirky himbos and bimbos.
Missing the point that Iron Bull is a person who's struggling with his like identity as a Kunari and his identity as like someone else, and the fact that Queen is like just born a Talva Shoth and has the context of that. Like, I don't know, my man. Like, it's so weird to me. Like, this is the only reason why Absolution is ever mentioned. It's not because like he thinks it's a bad show. It's not because he thinks it's like anything else other than that. It's just because he hates the fact he hates Quinn, and he just doesn't want them to exist. Like, my man, like, why'd you choose this like hill to die on? You know, you could have chosen far better hills to die on.
There was no consistency when it came to writing them, and it makes me so upset. The only part that stays consistent with the Kunari is that they're buff and they like to fight. Hell, their fucking visual design doesn't even stay consistent.
And again, he doesn't even talk about like how, like any Kunari structure in society. He doesn't talk about like the Ben Hathrath. He doesn't talk about the Antom or the Tamastrans. I can't remember the specific name for them. That part of the Kunari branch. He doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about the Book of Kuzland. He doesn't talk about any of that. Like, I can't take this guy's like critiques of like Dragon Age's failure to make the Kunaris consistent when he hasn't even explained it. You know, the most we get is like they're very survivalist and accepting, which is like wrong. Not wrong, but like still wrong. You know, man.
They literally just turned them into fucking D&D tieflings. But in the end, this show ultimately fails in what it wanted to do.
And yeah, that's it. That's why he talks about it. It's literally because of that. It's not anything else. And again, like, that's so dumb, you know, because this really does tell me this video was just made not really to examine the identity issues of the Dragon Age, but more to just like talk about, hey, it seems like hey, I just dislike all these decisions that BioWare does, you know, and I'm misunderstanding what BioWare is doing with Dragon Age. And that's it. And yeah, the last bit is just him talking about Dragon Age and sort of like how BioWare should look back, even though they're already that. And then he talks about Baldur's Gate 3 and saying like, yeah, Dragon Age fans, you have your game back. It's Baldur's Gate 3, a game that's nothing like Dragon Age Origins except for like the cinematics and companions. Literally, that's it. And like, that's the video. Like, yeah. So I don't know, what's wrong with this like video? Like, let's just summarize. What's wrong with this video is like it fundamentally doesn't understand what like BioWare is trying to do with Dragon Age. Are there like identity issues with Dragon Age? Yeah, sure. Art style, combat, easy, simple. You can make like a 5-minute video on that, and that's it, right? Like that's fundamentally it. You can also talk about like other like inconsistencies, but like that's fundamentally the issues. Two issues. Everything else is fine. The type of RPG it is consistent throughout the entire series. The type of storytelling it uses, like with characters and whatnot, it's fine. The lore is consistent. The world building is consistent. All of it is consistent, right? The only inconsistent things, as I've said before, combat and art style. But this guy like doesn't understand that, and that's the frustrating part and why it makes a lot of bad criticisms. You can see how it leads him to a lot of bad conclusions, because when he doesn't understand what like the lore is, he makes these assumptions that like that Iron Bull is not a Kunari and is more of a dwarf, which like makes no sense, you know, and that Quinn is like not a Kunari at all and is just like a tiefling for some reason, which is like makes no sense whatsoever and has no basis in the lore. It's just like, yeah, it's bad. And yeah, and that's like the video. This is a long one. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this because like it does frustrate me that these kind of videos exist and these kind of people like don't really understand. And here's the thing, right? If people don't like Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Inquisition, you know, for the other reasons, right? I don't dislike that. And if they dislike it because it's not like similar enough to Origins and like 1-to-1, then that's fine. But I do not think that Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition are so far removed from what Dragon Age Origins is. It just doesn't make sense to me. If you play these games, I cannot see how you can come to that conclusion at all. But yeah. Anyways, I hope you liked the video. If you did, perhaps liking the video would be nice. And also, if you liked it a lot, maybe consider subscribing. That'd be nice as well. And if you have any of your thoughts about this video or what I said, please leave it down below. So yeah, enjoy.